They called her worthless, a mute burden in a world where silence meant weakness. But when the Alpha King's hunters dragged Lyra Vane from the forest she'd survived alone for 5 years, they had no idea what they'd just unleashed. In a kingdom built on brutality, where women were currency and power was everything, one voiceless outcast would shatter every rule, and the most feared ruler alive would never be the same. This is the story of how silence became the loudest weapon of all. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. And if you want to see how this ends, you'll need to stick around till the very last word. Hit that like button, and let's dive in. The forest didn't forgive mistakes. Lyra Vane had learned that the hard way, back when her hands were still soft and her instincts dull. 5 winters ago, she'd stumbled into these woods with nothing but torn clothes and bleeding feet, running from a fate worse than death. The Borderlands didn't care about her story. The wolves didn't care that she'd been branded defective for refusing to speak. The cold didn't care that she was 16 and alone. But she'd survived. Not through luck. Not through mercy. Through watching, learning, and becoming something the forest couldn't kill. Now at 21, Lyra moved through the dense undergrowth like a shadow given form. Her bare feet found purchase on moss-slick stones without a sound. Her breath controlled, shallow, invisible in the pre-dawn mist. The recurve bow slung across her back was crude but effective. She'd carved it herself from yew wood, strung it with deer sinew, fletched the arrows with crow feathers. She crouched behind a fallen oak, eyes tracking the deer 30 paces ahead. A young buck, antlers just beginning to branch. He grazed near a stream, oblivious. Lyra's fingers brushed the bowstring, drew, held. The buck's head snapped up. She froze. His nostrils flared, testing the air. Lyra had positioned herself downwind, had rubbed her skin with pine sap and earth to mask her scent, but deer were paranoid creatures, prey animals, like her. The buck's ear twitched. Lyra released. The arrow flew true, punching through the deer's chest just behind the shoulder. The animal bolted 3 steps before its legs gave out. Clean. Quick. The way she preferred. She waited a full minute before approaching, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved except wind-stirred branches. Still, she kept her hand near the knife at her belt as she knelt beside the carcass. "Thank you," she mouthed silently, pressing her palm to the buck's still warm flank. The forest provided. The forest took. She'd learned to respect both. Field dressing the deer took 20 minutes. Lyra worked efficiently, her blade sharp, her cuts precise. She'd save the heart and liver, smoke the rest of the meat. The hide would patch her shelter. The sinew would make more bowstring. Nothing wasted. She was elbow deep in the chest cavity when she heard it. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses. Heavy. Moving fast through terrain that should slow them down. Lyra's head snapped up, blood-slicked hands freezing mid-cut. Her hideout was 3 miles north, carefully hidden in a dense thicket near a spring. No one had come this deep into the forest in over a year. The last group had been deserters from the endless border wars, desperate men she'd avoided by staying absolutely still in a tree hollow for 16 hours. These riders weren't wandering, they were hunting. Lyra abandoned the deer carcass, snatched her bow, and ran. She didn't follow game trails, too obvious. Instead, she cut through thorny underbrush that tore at her leather wrappings, splashed through a creek to break her scent trail, doubled back twice to confuse any tracker. Her heart hammered, but her breathing stayed controlled. Panic killed faster than any predator. The hoofbeats grew louder. Impossible. She'd covered her tracks perfectly. Lyra scrambled up a massive oak, bark rough under her palms, and pressed herself against a thick branch 20 feet up. Through the canopy she could see them now. 6 riders in dark leather armor, their horses massive war horses that shouldn't even fit between the trees. But what made her blood ice wasn't the riders. It was the hounds. 3 enormous beasts, each the size of a wolf, with sleek black fur and eyes that glowed amber even in daylight. They moved with an unnatural fluidity, noses to the ground, following a scent trail straight toward her tree. Tracking hounds. Spelled. Lyra's fingers tightened on the branch. In all her years out here, she'd never seen magic used for hunting. Magic was rare, expensive, reserved for the kingdom's elite. These weren't bandits or deserters. The lead rider raised a fist. The group stopped directly below her tree. "She doubled back here." The voice was female, crisp with authority. "The hounds don't lie." "Could be a him," another rider offered. "Male, younger." Intel was thin. "Doesn't matter." The woman dismounted, her boots hitting the forest floor with practiced ease. She was tall, lean, with silver hair bound in a warrior's knot. A lieutenant's insignia marked her collar. Alpha's orders were clear. Find the rogue living in the Thornwood. Bring them back alive. Lyra's stomach dropped. The Alpha King. Draven Kale. Every child in the Borderlands knew his name, whispered it like a curse or a prayer, depending on which side of his wrath you stood. He'd unified the fractured territories through sheer brutality, crushed 3 rebellions before his 25th birthday, executed his own generals for hesitation in battle. They said he was more beast than man, that his rages left entire rooms painted red, and somehow he knew about her. Tracks end here, the younger soldier reported, studying the ground, but she didn't vanish. The lieutenant looked up, directly at Lyra. Hello up there. Lyra didn't move, didn't breathe. Maybe if she stayed absolutely still. I can see your silhouette against the sky, the lieutenant continued, almost conversational. And even if I couldn't, the hounds already marked you. Come down, make this easy. 6 armed soldiers, 3 magical hounds. One of her. Lyra knocked an arrow. Don't. The lieutenant's hand moved to her sword hilt. You put that bow down and climb down nice and slow, you'll arrive at the fortress intact. You shoot, and I can't promise my men won't get creative during the ride back. The threat hung in the air, ugly and clear. Lyra drew the bowstring anyway. She wasn't going back to a world of men who saw women as property. She'd rather die in her forest than live in their cages. The first arrow took the youngest soldier in the shoulder, punching through a gap in his armor. He screamed, toppling from his horse. The second arrow flew at the lieutenant, who moved with inhuman speed, her sword flashing up to deflect it mid-flight. Subdue her, the lieutenant barked. Non-lethal. Lyra was already moving, leaping from branch to branch with the agility of 5 years' practice. An arrow hissed past her ear, warning shot. She dropped to a lower branch, swung down, landed in a crouch, and sprinted. The hounds were faster. One slammed into her from the side, 100 pounds of muscle and spelled fury. Lyra hit the ground hard, air exploding from her lungs. Fangs snapped inches from her throat. She jammed her forearm into the beast's mouth, felt teeth pierce leather and skin, and drove her knife into its ribs. The hound yelped and released her. Lyra rolled, came up running, and found herself face to face with the lieutenant's sword. Brave, the woman said, breathing slightly harder. Stupid, but brave. Drop the knife. Lyra's fingers tightened on the handle. Blood dripped from her mangled forearm. 2 more hounds circled, growling. The remaining soldiers had dismounted, forming a loose perimeter. Nowhere to run. The lieutenant's expression softened just slightly. Listen, I don't know what you think is going to happen, but the Alpha wants you alive and unharmed. That's more protection than most people in this kingdom get. So please, drop the knife. Lyra's jaw clenched. Her eyes burned with unshed tears of rage and frustration. 5 years. 5 years of freedom, of survival, of silence and peace. The lieutenant moved like lightning, disarming Lyra with a practiced twist that sent the knife spinning into the leaves. Before Lyra could react, iron shackles clicked around her wrists. Get her on a horse, the lieutenant ordered, and someone bandage that arm before she bleeds out. The Alpha wants her presentable. They hauled Lyra up roughly. She thrashed once, violently, then forced herself still. Fighting now would just mean more injuries. Better to wait. Watch. Find an opening. The younger soldier she'd shot glared at her with murder in his eyes as a medic worked on his shoulder. Savage bitch, he spat. Quiet, Ren. The lieutenant swung into her saddle, then looked down at Lyra. What's your name? Lyra stared at her, silent. Can you speak? Lyra's expression didn't change. The lieutenant sighed. This is going to be a long ride. But the journey to the Alpha King's fortress took 4 days. They traveled fast, stopping only when the horses needed rest. Lyra was kept bound, her wounded arm cleaned and wrapped, but still throbbing with infection she could feel building. They fed her dried meat and hard bread, gave her water, even let her sleep under a blanket at night. All of it felt like the calm before an execution. She'd heard stories about Draven Kale's fortress, the Ironhold they called it, built into the side of a mountain, its walls reinforced with steel and spelled stone. A place designed to withstand siege, to project power, to remind everyone who approached that the Alpha King bowed to no one. When it finally came into view on the 5th morning, Lyra's breath caught despite herself. The Ironhold wasn't just a fortress. It was a statement carved in rock and metal. Massive walls rose from the mountainside like natural extensions of the stone, their surfaces smooth and dark. Guard towers punctuated the perimeter, each flying the Alpha's banner, a black wolf on crimson. The main gate was solid iron, reinforced with crossbeams that looked thick enough to stop a battering ram. "Impressive, isn't it?" the lieutenant murmured, guiding her horse up the approach road. "Took 3 years to build. The Alpha oversaw every detail himself." Lyra didn't respond. Couldn't, even if she'd wanted to. The gates groaned open as they approached, revealing a courtyard that could hold 1,000 soldiers. People stopped and stared as the lieutenant's group rode through. Servants, guards, courtiers in fine clothing that looked absurdly delicate against the fortress's brutality. All of them stared at Lyra. The filthy girl in torn leather and dried blood, her hair a wild tangle, her eyes feral and unblinking. "Is that her?" someone whispered. "The rogue from the Thornwood? She looks half dead. Why would the Alpha want that?" The whispers followed them across the courtyard to the main keep, a towering structure of black stone and narrow windows. Guards flanked the entrance, their armor polished to mirror brightness, their expressions carefully neutral. The lieutenant dismounted and pulled Lyra down after her. "This way." They climbed stone steps worn smooth by centuries of boots, passed through corridors lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Servants pressed themselves against the stone to let them pass, their eyes averted. Fear. The whole place reeked of it. Finally, they stopped before a set of massive wooden doors carved with wolves in mid-hunt. The lieutenant knocked twice. "Enter." The voice from within was deep, rough, unmistakably male. The doors swung open. The room beyond was a war council chamber, dominated by a table covered in maps and tactical markers. Weapons lined the walls, swords, axes, bows, some clearly ceremonial, others well-used and deadly. A fire roared in a hearth large enough to roast a whole pig, and standing with his back to them, studying a map of the borderlands, was Alpha King Draven Kale. He was huge. Not just tall. Lyra had seen tall men before, but built like violence given human form. Broad shoulders strained against a dark shirt, arms corded with muscle visible even through the fabric. His hair was black, cut short, and when he turned around, his face matched every brutal story she'd ever heard. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, pulling that eye slightly narrower. His jaw was hard angles and stubble, but it was his eyes that stopped her, pale gray, cold as winter ice, and fixed on her with an intensity that felt like physical pressure. "This is her?" His voice carried no doubt, only confirmation. "Yes, Alpha." The lieutenant stepped forward. "She led us on quite a chase. Killed one of the hounds, wounded Wren." Draven's gaze didn't leave Lyra. He circled her slowly, studying her like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. She forced herself to meet his stare, even as every instinct screamed to look away, to submit, to show the deference this predator expected. "She doesn't speak," the lieutenant added. "Haven't gotten a word out of her." "Can't or won't?" Draven stopped in front of Lyra close enough that she could smell leather and steel and something darker. Blood-stained earth, maybe. Battlefields. The lieutenant hesitated. "Unknown, Alpha." Draven reached out. Lyra flinched back violently, chains rattling. His hand froze mid-motion. For a second, something flashed in those cold eyes. Surprise, maybe? Or something else she couldn't name. Then his expression hardened again. "Take off the shackles. Alpha, she's dangerous. Now!" The lieutenant moved quickly, unlocking the iron cuffs. They fell to the floor with a heavy clank. Lyra rubbed her wrists, eyes darting between Draven and the door, calculating. The door was 20 feet away. She'd never make it. But maybe... "Don't." Draven's voice was quiet, almost bored. "I've seen grown warriors try to run. It never ends well for them." Lyra's hands curled into fists. "Lieutenant Kessa, leave us." "Alpha, I don't think..." "That wasn't a request." Kessa's jaw tightened, but she saluted and left, closing the doors behind her. The sound of them shutting echoed like a tomb ceiling. Lyra was alone with the Alpha King. Draven moved to a side table and poured 2 cups of water from a pitcher. He set one in front of Lyra, then leaned against the war table, sipping his own. Watching her. Seconds stretched. The fire crackled. Lyra didn't touch the water. "You're wondering why you're here," Draven said finally. "Why I sent my best trackers into the Thornwood for one woman who's been living like an animal for 5 years. Lyra's eyes narrowed. How did he know how long? I have informants everywhere, Draven continued, as if reading her thoughts, including among the village councils in the borderlands. 3 years ago, a merchant caravan reported signs of someone living deep in the forest. 2 years ago, hunters found expertly crafted snares and shelters. Last year, a deserter claimed he was stalked by a forest ghost who drove him out without ever showing her face. He set down his cup. You got sloppy, left too many traces. And when I heard the descriptions, a woman, silent, skilled at survival, I knew exactly who you were. Lyra's heart hammered. He couldn't possibly. Lyra Vane, daughter of Marcus Vane, a blacksmith in Ashwick, youngest of 4 daughters, branded defective at age 16 after refusing to speak following your mother's death. Your father tried to sell you to a merchant lord as a concubine. You ran. The blood drained from Lyra's face. Draven pushed off the table and approached her again, slower this time. Do you know what I find interesting? In 5 years, you've built a life alone in one of the most dangerous forests in the kingdom. You've survived winters that kill seasoned soldiers. You've avoided detection by scouts, bandits, and deserters, all without speaking a single word. He stopped an arm's length away. That kind of discipline is rare. That kind of skill is rarer. So I'll ask you once, and I want you to understand that your answer, or lack of one, will determine everything that happens next. His pale eyes bored into hers. Why don't you speak? Lyra's throat worked. She could feel the words there, locked behind a vow she'd made kneeling in her mother's blood 5 years ago. A vow to a dying woman who'd made her promise to never let any man command her voice again. Silence is your armor, her mother had whispered. They can't own what they can't hear. Lyra shook her head once. Firm. Draven studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. All right. He turned away, moving back to the war table. You'll be given quarters in the East Wing. Clean clothes, food, medical attention for that arm. It's infected. Lyra stared at him, confused. No punishment? No interrogation? You're not a prisoner, Draven said without looking up, rearranging markers on his map. You're a guest. You're free to move through the fortress as you please, eat in the halls, use the training yards. But you will not leave the Ironhold without my permission. Try, and my guards will stop you. Am I clear? Lyra didn't move. Draven glanced up. Nod if you understand. Slowly, grudgingly, Lyra nodded. Good. Kessa will show you to your room. Dismissed. He went back to his maps, effectively erasing her presence. Lyra stood there for another heartbeat, mind reeling. Then Kessa opened the door, she'd clearly been waiting just outside, and gestured for Lyra to follow. As they walked through the corridors again, Kessa spoke quietly. You're either very lucky or very doomed. No one can tell yet. Lyra shot her a questioning look. The Alpha doesn't bring people to the Ironhold as guests, Kessa explained. He doesn't waste resources on charity. Whatever he wants from you, it's important enough to hunt you down and protect you from his own court. That makes you either an asset. She paused at a door and pushed it open. Or bait for something bigger. The room beyond was small but clean. A bed with actual blankets, a wash basin, a window with iron bars but real glass. Compared to her shelter in the forest, it was a palace. Dinner is served at sundown in the main hall, Kessa said. Someone will bring you clothes. Get that arm looked at by the fortress healer. 3rd door down, right side. And a word of advice? Lyra looked at her. Stay quiet. Watch everything. The Alpha's court is full of vipers who'll smile while slitting your throat. Kessa's expression softened slightly. You survived the Thornwood alone. You can survive this. Just don't trust anyone. She left, closing the door behind her. Lyra stood in the middle of the room, filthy and exhausted and utterly out of her depth. Through the barred window, she could see the courtyard below, guards patrolling, servants scurrying. A cage with prettier bars was still a cage, but her mother's voice echoed in her memory. Survive first, escape second. Lyra sat on the edge of the bed. Gods, it was soft, and began planning. The fortress healer was an old woman named Mira with shrewd eyes and gentle hands. She unwrapped Lyra's arm, tisked at the infection, and cleaned it with a foul-smelling salve that burned like fire. Lucky you got here when you did, Mira muttered, rebandaging the wound with clean linen. Another day and I'd be taking the arm. Hound bites are nasty business, especially spelled ones. Lyra watched her work, noting the organized shelves of herbs and tinctures, the cleanliness of the instruments. Professional, competent. "You're the forest girl, aren't you?" Mira asked, not looking up. "The one the Alpha dragged in?" Lyra didn't respond. "Figures. Everyone's talking about you. Half think you're a spy from the Southern Kingdoms. Other half think you're a witch." Mira tied off the bandage and sat back. "Personally, I think you're just a girl who learned to survive. Nothing magical about that. Just stubbornness and luck." She stood and moved to a shelf, pulling down a small clay jar. "This is for the pain. Mix a fingerful in water twice a day, and get some actual food in you. You look half-starved." Lyra accepted the jar with a small nod of thanks. "One more thing." Mira lowered her voice, glancing at the closed door. "The Alpha's been different lately. Volatile. More so than usual. His council's worried. Some think he's losing control of the rage that makes him such an effective killer." Lyra's brow furrowed. "Why tell her this?" "I'm saying this because you're new, and you don't know the rules yet," Mira continued. "The Alpha King is the most dangerous man in this fortress, maybe in the whole kingdom. You stay out of his way, you keep your head down, and you might live long enough to figure out why you're really here." The old woman's eyes were kind but deadly serious. "Now go. Get cleaned up before dinner, and for the love of all that's holy, try not to get yourself killed in the first week." The clothes they brought her were simple but well made, a tunic and pants in dark gray, soft leather boots that actually fit. Lyra washed in the basin, scrubbing away days of sweat and blood, then stared at her reflection in the small mirror. She barely recognized herself. The girl who'd run from Ashwick had been soft, sheltered despite her poverty. This woman had sharp edges and scars, muscles earned through survival, eyes that had seen too much too young. But she was alive, and she'd stay that way. Dinner in the main hall was a lesson in hierarchy and violence wrapped in ceremony. The hall was massive, able to seat hundreds, with long tables arranged by rank. At the far end, elevated on a dais, sat the high table where Draven presided with his inner circle: military commanders, senior advisors, people who wore power like a second skin. Lyra was placed at a middle table, far enough from the dais to be unimportant, but close enough to be watched. She could feel eyes on her constantly, whispers following her every movement. The food was rich: roasted meat, fresh bread, vegetables she hadn't seen in years. She ate slowly, mechanically, while eavesdropping on conversations around her. Expansion into the Eastern Territories is proceeding ahead of schedule. The supply lines are holding, but barely. Heard the Southern Kingdoms are making moves again? And always, woven through everything, fear of the Alpha. Respect? Yes. Loyalty? Maybe. But underneath it all, primal fear of what he could do if provoked. Lyra was halfway through her meal when the hall went silent. She looked up. Draven had stood, his presence enough to command instant attention. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. "Tomorrow we march on the Redstone Pass," he announced. "Intelligence confirms the rebels have fortified their position. We'll crush them before they can consolidate." A murmur of approval rippled through the hall. "Commander Voss, you'll lead the vanguard. Kessa, your unit will flank from the North Ridge. I'll take the center with the heavy cavalry." He scanned the hall, and for one heart-stopping moment, his gaze landed on Lyra. Then he looked away. "We leave at dawn." Dismissed. The hall erupted into movement as soldiers and advisors stood, already planning, already preparing for war. Lyra sat frozen, watching the organized chaos, understanding with cold clarity what kind of world she'd been dragged into. This wasn't just a fortress, it was a war machine, and she was trapped in its gears. That night, Lyra lay in the unfamiliar bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the fortress settle around her. Footsteps in distant corridors, the change of guard shifts, wind howling through the mountain passes. She'd escaped one cage only to be locked in another, but cages could be studied, patterns could be learned, and every prison had a weakness. She just had to survive long enough to find it. Outside, thunder rumbled, a storm rolling in from the north. Lyra closed her eyes and tried to remember the sound of wind in forest leaves, of rain on her shelter's roof, of the absolute silence that meant safety. Instead, she heard the Alpha King's voice. "Why don't you speak?" Her hand moved unconsciously to her throat, fingers brushing the skin where no scar showed but the vow still burned. Silence is your armor. But in this place, Lyra was beginning to wonder if her armor would be enough, or if it would become her tomb. The Alpha's army left before sunrise, a river of steel and leather flowing through the fortress gates like blood from a wound. Lyra watched from her barred window as torches bobbed in the pre-dawn darkness, as war horses snorted fog into the cold air, as men who might be corpses by nightfall marched toward the mountain passes with their weapons gleaming. Draven rode at the front, his black warhorse massive beneath him, his presence commanding even from 3 stories up. He didn't look back at the fortress, didn't hesitate, just spurred his mount forward and disappeared into the gray morning with 500 soldiers at his back. The fortress felt different after they left, emptier, like a held breath waiting to be released. Lyra spent the first day exploring her new cage, mapping exits and guard rotations with the same care she'd used to track game trails. The east wing where she'd been housed was mostly empty, guest quarters rarely used, judging by the dust in unoccupied rooms. The main keep bustled with servants and the soldiers left behind, but they avoided her like she carried plague. She didn't mind. Invisibility was a weapon she knew how to use. By the second day, she'd found the training yards, a sprawling complex of weapon racks, practice dummies, and sand-covered sparring rings. A handful of younger soldiers drilled under the watch of a grizzled instructor with a voice like grinding stone. Lyra stood in the shadows of an archway and watched them work through sword forms, their movements clumsy compared to the lethal efficiency she'd seen in Kessa's unit. These were boys playing at war, not men who'd survived it. "You lost, Forest Rat?" She turned. A young man in fine clothes leaned against the archway, arms crossed, expression dripping contempt. He was handsome in a soft way, clean-shaven, hair-styled, hands that had never calloused from real work. A courtier, probably. Or some lord's useless son. Lyra stared at him, silent. Right, the mute. He pushed off the wall and circled her like Draven had, but without any of the Alpha's predatory grace. This was performance, not threat. Everyone's wondering what you did to catch the Alpha's attention. Must be something special under all that. He gestured vaguely at her. Wildness. Lyra's jaw tightened. My theory? You're a spy. Southern Kingdom sent you to infiltrate the fortress, play helpless, get close to our king. He leaned in, breath reeking of wine despite the early hour. If I were in charge, I'd have you in the dungeons being questioned properly. But Draven's always had a weakness for strays. A shadow fell across them both. Careful, Aldrich. Kessa stepped into view, her hand resting casually on her sword hilt. Last person who insulted the Alpha's judgment ended up missing teeth. Aldrich straightened, his sneer faltering. I was just harassing a guest under the Alpha's protection. Kessa's smile was sharp as broken glass. Want me to include that in my next report? The color drained from Aldrich's face. He sketched a mocking bow toward Lyra and retreated quickly, nearly tripping over his own boots. Kessa watched him go, then looked at Lyra. You handled that well. Most people would have swung at him by now. Lyra raised an eyebrow. Come on, I'll show you something actually useful. Kessa led her deeper into the training complex, past the basic drill yards to a smaller private area surrounded by high walls. Weapon racks lined the perimeter, not practice weapons, but real steel. A few straw dummies stood in the center, already torn to shreds by previous training. The Alpha's personal training ground, Kessa explained, selecting a practice sword from the rack. He lets his inner circle use it when he's away, which means right now it's empty. She tossed the sword to Lyra, who caught it one-handed. Show me what you've got. Lyra hesitated. She'd never trained with a sword. Her weapons were bow and knife, tools of distance and stealth. But something in Kessa's expression wasn't mocking. It was curious, maybe even respectful. Lyra stepped into the ring and assumed a basic guard position she'd seen soldiers use. Kessa attacked immediately. The lieutenant moved like water, her blade dancing through combinations that should have been impossible to defend. Lyra backpedaled, blocking desperately, her arms shaking with each impact. She'd fought for her life before, but never against someone trained, never against someone who knew exactly how to dismantle her defenses. Kessa's blade stopped an inch from Lyra's throat. Not bad, the lieutenant said, stepping back. Your footwork's terrible and your grip's all wrong, but your reaction time's excellent. You've got combat instincts, just no formal training. Lyra lowered the sword, breathing hard. The forest taught you to survive, Kessa continued, sheathing her blade. But survival and victory are different things. Out there you could run. In here, She gestured at the fortress walls surrounding them. Running just gets you killed slower. Lyra's eyes narrowed. Why was Kessa helping her? The lieutenant seemed to read the question. The Alpha wants you alive and functional. My job is making sure that happens. Plus, she picked up a water skin and took a long drink. I'm curious about you. 5 years alone in the Thornwood, and you're still sane. That's impressive. She tossed the water skin to Lyra. I'm going to teach you how to fight properly. Not because I like you. I don't know you well enough to like you. But because if you're going to be in this fortress, you need to be able to defend yourself. Aldrich's an annoying peacock, but there are worse things in the Ironhold than insults. Lyra drank, mind racing. This could be manipulation, a way to control her under the guise of help. But it could also be genuine. And regardless of motive, learning to fight with more than desperation would be useful. She nodded once. Good. We start tomorrow at dawn. Don't be late. The days developed a rhythm. Mornings training with Kessa, who beat techniques into Lyra's body through sheer repetition until her muscles learned what her mind couldn't articulate. Afternoons exploring the fortress, mapping its secrets, the servant passages, the weak points in the wall patrols, the supply routes that could become escape routes. Evenings in the main hall, eating while listening to the fortress's pulse. Who held power? Who wanted more? Who was loyal and who was just waiting for the right moment to strike? The name that kept appearing in whispered conversations was Counselor Thorn. Lyra didn't meet him until the 5th day after Draven's departure. She was leaving the training yard, covered in sweat and new bruises, when she nearly collided with a man in expensive robes trimmed with silver thread. He was older, maybe 50, with salt and pepper hair and eyes that calculated everything they saw. Ah, the forest girl. His voice was smooth, cultured. I've been hoping to make your acquaintance. I am Counselor Thorn, senior advisor to the Alpha King. Lyra stepped back, instantly wary. Please, don't let me interrupt your training regimen. Lieutenant Kessa speaks highly of your progress. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Walk with me? I'd like to discuss your situation. It wasn't a request. They walked through a garden courtyard, dead plants waiting for spring, stone benches positioned for private conversations. Thorn clasped his hands behind his back, the picture of benevolent authority. You must be confused about why you're here, he began. The Alpha is not known for his hospitality. Yet he's given you quarters, protection, even training. Unusual, wouldn't you say? Lyra's silence was answer enough. Between you and me, I believe the Alpha is going through a difficult period. The constant warfare, the responsibility of ruling, it weighs on even the strongest men. He's become more volatile, more unpredictable. Thorn's expression turned sympathetic. I worry about him, we all do. He stopped by a dead rosebush and examined it thoughtfully. I think he brought you here as an experiment, a test of some kind. He's always been fascinated by survival. It's what made him such an effective soldier. And you, thriving alone in the Thornwood for 5 years. Thorn looked at her directly. You represent something to him, perhaps a mirror, perhaps a challenge. Lyra's eyes narrowed. Where was this going? My concern, Thorn continued, is that his focus on you is distracting him from critical matters of state. The rebellion in the Eastern Territories is growing. The Southern Kingdoms smell weakness. We need our Alpha King sharp, focused, brutal when necessary. Not, he gestured vaguely, playing games with silent girls from the forest. There it was. The real message beneath the courtesy. You're a distraction, a liability. I'm telling you this as a kindness, Thorn said, his tone warm as poisoned honey. When the Alpha returns from Redstone Pass, and he will return, he always does, he'll likely lose interest in you. These whims of his never last. So I'd advise you to think carefully about your future here. Perhaps it would be better for everyone if you simply left, returned to your forest, disappeared as quietly as you arrived. He smiled again. Just a suggestion, of course. The Alpha's protection only extends as far as his interest, and interest is such a fleeting thing. Thorn walked away, leaving Lyra standing alone among the dead plants. She stood there for a long moment, processing the threat wrapped in advice. Thorn was powerful. She'd heard enough dinner conversations to know he basically ran the fortress administration while Draven handled military matters. If he wanted her gone, he had ways to make it happen that wouldn't trace back to him. But running now would mean giving up, proving she was weak. and Lyra Vane had survived too much to break that easily. The Alpha's army returned 8 days after they'd left. Lyra heard them coming before she saw them. The thunder of hooves, the rattle of armor, voices raised in victory. She joined the crowd gathering in the courtyard, watching as the gates swung open and the first riders poured through. They looked different than when they'd left. Harder, blood-stained, carrying wounded on makeshift stretchers, but victorious. Draven rode at the front, his armor dented and splattered with dried blood that wasn't his. He dismounted in the center of the courtyard, and soldiers immediately swarmed him with reports, requests, problems that needed solving. His eyes swept the crowd and stopped on Lyra. For a heartbeat, everything else fell away. Then someone else demanded his attention, and the moment broke. That night's feast was loud, drunken, celebratory. Tales of the battle at Redstone Pass grew more elaborate with each retelling. The rebels crushed, their fortress broken, their leader executed publicly as a warning to others. Lyra sat at her usual table and watched Draven at the high table. He looked exhausted beneath the victory, shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. He barely touched his food, just listened to reports from his commanders with an expression that revealed nothing. Midway through the feast, he stood and left. Without thinking, Lyra followed. She tracked him through corridors, staying far enough back to avoid detection, watching as he bypassed his own quarters and headed for the eastern ramparts. The guards let him pass without question. Who would stop the Alpha King? Lyra waited until he was out of sight, then slipped past the guards with the stealth she'd learned in the forest. Easy. They were watching for threats from outside, not ghosts from within. She found Draven standing at the edge of the rampart, staring out at the mountain ranges silhouetted against the moonlit sky. The wind up here was brutal, cold enough to steal breath. "I know you're there." Lyra froze. Draven didn't turn around. "You move quietly, better than most of my scouts, but not quiet enough." She stepped out of the shadows, prepared to be sent away. Instead, Draven gestured to the space beside him at the wall. "Come here." Lyra approached cautiously, stopping an arm's length away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind howled. Below, the fortress sprawled like a sleeping beast. 17 men, Draven said finally. "That's how many we lost at Redstone Pass. Could have been worse. Should have been worse. The rebels were better fortified than intelligence suggested, but we won. And winning is all that matters in war." His hands gripped the stone wall. "Do you know what the hardest part of command is? It's not the strategy, not the fighting. It's carrying the weight of every decision, knowing that your orders are the difference between men going home to their families or being buried in mass graves." He looked at her then, and Lyra was struck by the exhaustion in his eyes. This wasn't the brutal Alpha King from the stories. This was just a man, worn down by responsibility. "Everyone expects me to be a monster," Draven continued, "to rule through fear and violence. And I do, because it works. Because in this kingdom, at this time, anything else is weakness. Weakness gets you killed." His jaw tightened. "But sometimes I wonder what it costs, who I'm becoming." Why was he telling her this? They were practically strangers. As if reading her thoughts, Draven's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile. "You're the only person in this fortress who doesn't want anything from me. You don't need my approval. Don't fear my anger. Don't plot for my favor. You're just here, silent, honest in your silence." He turned back to the mountains. "In the forest, when you were alone, did you ever feel free?" Lyra considered the question. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I thought so." Draven's voice was quiet. "That's what I saw in your eyes when they brought you in. Not fear, not submission. Freedom. And I realized I haven't felt that in years." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of snow from higher elevations. "Stay in the iron hold," Draven said. "Not as a prisoner, not as bait or a political tool. Just stay. Let me figure out what it is about you that makes the chaos in my head quiet down." Lyra's breath caught. This wasn't an order, it was a request, maybe even a plea. Before she could respond, before she could even process what responding might look like, footsteps echoed on the rampart stairs. Kessa appeared slightly out of breath. "Alpha, forgive the interruption, but Counselor Thorn requests an urgent meeting. He says there's been a development with the Southern Kingdoms." The exhaustion in Draven's expression hardened back into command. "Tell him I'll be there shortly." Kessa saluted and left. Draven looked at Lyra one more time. Think about what I said. Then he was gone, and Lyra was alone with the wind and her thoughts. 3 days later, the fragile peace shattered. Lyra was in the training yard with Kessa, working through advanced defensive forms when shouting erupted from the main keep. Servants ran past, panicked. Guards sprinted toward the Alpha's council chamber. Kessa's expression darkened. "Stay here." She ran toward the commotion. Lyra, of course, followed. The council chamber doors were open, and inside was chaos. Maps scattered on the floor. A chair overturned, and Draven, his face twisted in fury, holding Counselor Thorn against the wall by his throat. "Say that again," Draven snarled. "Tell me again that I'm compromised." Thorn's face was purple, but his eyes held no fear. "You're proving my point. Alpha, please." Another counselor, a woman named Sarah, stepped forward carefully. "Counselor Thorn is simply concerned about the rumors. We all are." "What rumors?" "That you've been distracted. That your judgment regarding the forest girl shows weakness." Sarah's hands were raised, placating. "The court whispers that you're keeping her as a pet. That you've gone soft." Draven's grip tightened on Thorn's throat. "I could snap your neck right now and prove exactly how soft I am." "And then what?" Thorn wheezed. "Rule through fear, while they plot. Behind your back." Kessa appeared beside Lyra, pulling her back into the corridor. "You shouldn't see this." But Lyra had already seen enough. Draven released Thorn, who collapsed coughing. The Alpha turned to face his full council, and the rage emanating from him was palpable. "You want me to prove I'm not compromised? Fine." His voice was cold as winter death. "The girl is no longer under my protection. She's just another person in the fortress. If she causes problems, deal with her however you see fit." Lyra's blood froze. Kessa's grip on her arm tightened. "Meeting adjourned," Draven said, and stormed out. He passed Lyra in the corridor without even glancing at her. The counselors filed out, Thorn rubbing his throat but looking oddly satisfied. He saw Lyra and smiled. "Well," he said pleasantly, "that changes things, doesn't it?" That night, someone tried to kill her. Lyra woke to a knife gleaming in moonlight, already descending toward her chest. Instinct saved her. She rolled left, felt the blade punch through the mattress where she'd been sleeping. Her attacker was already pulling back for another strike. Lyra kicked out, connected with a knee, heard a grunt of pain. She rolled off the bed, grabbed the water pitcher from the nightstand, and hurled it. It shattered against her attacker's head, buying her seconds. Not enough. The figure, masked, dressed in black, recovered faster than any drunk or amateur. This was a professional, an assassin. Lyra's hand found the practice knife Kessa had given her, hidden under the bed frame. 8 inches of steel. Not ideal, but better than nothing. The assassin came at her fast, blade work efficient and brutal. Lyra defended desperately, using every technique Kessa had beaten into her, fighting for her life in a room that had become a cage. They crashed into furniture, the mirror shattered, blood, hers or theirs, she couldn't tell, splattered the floor. Lyra made a decision. A gamble. She dropped her guard on purpose, leaving her left side exposed. The assassin took the bait, lunging for the opening. Lyra twisted at the last second, took a shallow cut across her ribs instead of a fatal stab, and drove her knife up under the assassin's arm. Flesh parted, bones scraped. The assassin's blade clattered to the floor. Lyra didn't stop. She couldn't afford to. She kicked the assassin's knee, heard it pop, and when they went down, she was on them, knife to their throat. "Who sent you?" she demanded, then realized she couldn't speak, couldn't ask the question that mattered most. The assassin laughed, blood bubbling from their lips. "Doesn't matter. You're already dead. The Alpha threw you to the wolves. It's only a matter of—" Lyra pressed the blade deeper, cutting off the words. She didn't want to kill. Had never killed a person before. But in that moment, with adrenaline screaming through her veins and blood soaking her nightclothes, she understood what Draven had said about survival. Sometimes you didn't get a choice. The assassin went limp. Lyra sat back, shaking, covered in blood, and realized she was crying. Footsteps pounded in the corridor. Guards burst through her door, weapons drawn, and stopped dead at the scene. Behind them, Kessa pushed through. "What the hell?" She saw Lyra, saw the body, saw the wreckage of the room. "Secure the area," Kessa barked at the guards. "Find out who this is and how they got past security. Move!" The guards scrambled. Kessa knelt beside Lyra and gently took the bloody knife from her grip. "Are you hurt? Lyra, look at me! Are you hurt?" Lyra managed to shake her head, though the cut on her ribs throbbed. Not deep. She'd survive. "Who would—" Kessa stopped, understanding dawning in her expression. "Thorn." She helped Lyra stand. "We need to get you somewhere safe, now. Take her to my quarters." Both women spun. Draven stood in the doorway, still in his sleeping clothes but armed, his pale eyes taking in the carnage. His expression was unreadable. "Alpha, I don't think—" Kessa began. "Now, Lieutenant." His tone left no room for argument. Kessa helped Lyra walk, supporting her through corridors that blurred together. They climbed stairs, passed through guarded doors, and finally entered a suite of rooms that was clearly the Alpha's private domain. Sparse, functional, maps everywhere. A bed that looked barely used. Draven directed them to a side room, a bathing chamber with a deep tub and clean water already heated. Luxury beyond anything Lyra had seen. "Clean her up," Draven ordered Kessa. "Tend her wounds. Then leave us." Kessa's jaw tightened, but she nodded. When they were alone, Kessa helped Lyra strip off the blood-soaked nightclothes and examined the cut across her ribs. "Shallow. You were lucky." She cleaned the wound with practiced efficiency, then bandaged it with strips of clean linen. The warm water in the tub turned pink as Lyra washed away blood and sweat and the trembling aftermath of violence. "You killed someone tonight," Kessa said quietly. "Your first?" Lyra nodded. "It never gets easier. Anyone who says it does is lying." Kessa handed her a clean robe. "But you survived. That's what matters." She helped Lyra dry off and dress, then led her back to the main room where Draven waited, now fully dressed and pacing like a caged wolf. "Leave us," he told Kessa. The lieutenant hesitated, looked at Lyra. "Will you be all right?" Lyra managed a small nod. Kessa left, closing the door behind her. Draven stopped pacing and faced Lyra. "I made a mistake today. I thought throwing you to the wolves would appease my council, prove I wasn't compromised. Instead, I nearly got you killed." He moved to a side table and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid, handed one to Lyra. "I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, led men into battles they didn't survive, executed people who might have been innocent, ruled through fear because it was the only language this broken kingdom understood." He drank deeply. "But this cuts differently." Lyra sipped the drink, some kind of harsh liquor that burned going down, and watched him carefully. "You want to know why I brought you here?" Draven continued. "The truth is, I didn't know at first. I just knew that when I heard about you, surviving alone in the Thornwood, silent and strong, something in me recognized something in you." He set down his glass. "I'm not a good man, Lyra. I've done terrible things. I'll probably do more terrible things before this is over. But when you're near me, the rage that's always burning in my head quiets. Just for a moment. Just enough for me to remember what it's like to not be constantly fighting." He looked at her, really looked at her, and Lyra saw the truth in his exhausted eyes. He was lonely, powerful, and feared and utterly alone, just like she had been. "Thorn will come for you again," Draven said. "He sees you as a weakness to exploit, and maybe you are. Maybe caring about anything beyond power and survival is weakness in this world." His jaw tightened. "But I'm done pretending I don't." He closed the distance between them in 2 strides and cupped her face gently, the same hands that had choked Thorn hours ago, now touching her like she might break. "Stay with me. Here, where I can protect you. Let me figure out how to keep you safe while keeping this kingdom from tearing itself apart." Lyra's heart hammered. She should pull away, should maintain distance, should remember that this man was dangerous, that this world wasn't hers, that getting close to anyone was a risk she'd sworn never to take again. But his hands were warm, and for the first time since her mother died, someone was asking her to stay, instead of demanding she leave. Slowly, carefully, Lyra reached up and placed her hand over his. Draven's eyes widened slightly. Then he leaned his forehead against hers, just breathing, just existing in the same space. "I don't know how this ends," he whispered, "but I know I'm not letting Thorn or anyone else take you from me." Outside, thunder rumbled, another storm approaching. But in this moment, in this room, Lyra felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Safe. Even if it was an illusion, even if it couldn't last. For now, it was enough. For now, it was enough. But now, lasted exactly 3 days before the fortress turned into a battlefield without armies. Lyra stayed in Draven's quarters, sleeping in the side chamber while he worked through the nights at his war table, planning campaigns and border defenses. He'd assigned 4 guards to rotate outside the door, men Kessa personally vouched for, veterans who'd bled beside the Alpha and wouldn't sell out for Thorn's coin. It should have felt like protection. Instead, it felt like a countdown to something worse. The whispers started immediately. The court buzzed with speculation about what the Alpha King was doing with the forest girl behind closed doors. Some said he'd taken her as a mistress. Others claimed she'd bewitched him with forest magic. A few suggested she was a southern spy who'd seduced him for information. All of it poison. All of it spreading. Lyra felt the weight of 1,000 eyes whenever she left the Alpha's quarters. She'd tried going back to the training yard once, but the soldiers there stopped mid-drill to stare. Kessa had been there and cleared them out with a string of curses that would have made a sailor blush, but the damage was done. She was marked, branded, not as Draven's equal or even his ally, but as his weakness. On the 4th morning, Draven was called to an emergency council meeting. He'd tried to leave Lyra behind, but she'd followed him to the council chamber doors, stubborn and silent. "You can't come in," he'd said, his voice low. "They'll use your presence as ammunition." Lyra had crossed her arms, planted her feet. Draven's mouth had twitched, almost a smile. "Fine, but stay outside, and if things get ugly, leave, promise me." She'd nodded, knowing it was a lie even as she made it. The council chamber doors were thick oak, but voices carried when people shouted. And within 10 minutes of the meeting starting, people were definitely shouting. Complete disrespect for this council's authority. "The southern kingdoms are mobilizing and you're playing house with a mute peasant. If you cannot separate your personal indulgences from matters of state, enough." Draven's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "My personal life is not your concern, Thorn. It becomes our concern when it affects your judgment." Thorn's voice was calm, reasonable, the most dangerous kind of poison. 2 weeks ago, you would have executed anyone who questioned your orders. Yesterday, you spent 3 hours reviewing supply routes that any competent quartermaster could handle. You're distracted, Alpha, and distraction in wartime kills kingdoms. I'm handling both the war and the kingdom just fine. Are you? Another voice, Counselor Sarah. Because reports from the Eastern Front suggest rebel activity is increasing. They're regrouping faster than anticipated, and our spies in the southern kingdoms report unusual troop movements near the border. A pause. Papers rustling. I have those same reports, Draven said. I'm aware of the situation. Then you're aware we need to act decisively. Strike the rebels before they consolidate. Send a message to the south that we're not weakened by. By what? Say it, Thorn. By sentiment. By caring about things that don't matter in the grand calculus of power. Lyra's hands clenched. She understood now why Draven had wanted her to leave. This wasn't a council meeting. It was a trial, with her as the unspoken defendant. The girl matters to me, Draven said, each word deliberate. That makes her matter to this kingdom. If you have a problem with that, we have a problem with vulnerability. Thorn's voice hardened. You've built this kingdom on strength, on being the predator that everyone else fears. But keeping that girl here, protecting her, showing the court that you can be, softened, it makes you look weak, and weakness invites challenge. Is that a threat? It's an observation, one your father would have understood before his sentimentality got him killed. The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop. Lyra had heard fragments about Draven's father, the previous Alpha King, assassinated during a peace negotiation because he'd trusted the wrong ally. The event that had turned Draven from a soldier into a ruler, from a man into a weapon. When Draven spoke again, his voice was so quiet Lyra had to strain to hear it. My father died because he believed in honor among kings. I learned that lesson well, Counselor, which is why I know exactly what you're doing. And what is that? Testing me, pushing to see how far you can go before I break, trying to force me into a corner where I have to choose between the girl and the crown, that a chair scraped. Footsteps. But you've miscalculated, because I'm not my father, and I don't make choices I'm not prepared to defend with blood. Silence. This meeting is over, Draven said. Dismissed. The doors opened and counselors filed out, their faces ranging from frustrated to calculating. Thorn was last, and when he saw Lyra standing there, his expression flickered with something dark before settling back into courteous neutrality. Still here, I see. he said pleasantly. How unfortunate. He walked away before she could react, not that she would have known how. Draven emerged, looked at Lyra, and sighed. I told you to leave if it got ugly. She raised an eyebrow. Right. When have you ever done what you're told? He gestured for her to follow. Come on, I need air. They ended up on the same eastern rampart where they'd talked after the battle at Redstone Pass. The wind was brutal, but Lyra had learned to welcome it. Wind meant she could hear people coming. Wind was honest. They're going to force a crisis, Draven said, staring out at the mountains. Thorn's been building support among the minor lords, promising them favorable trade agreements and land grants if they back his plays for more council authority. He wants to limit my power, turn me into a figurehead while he runs the kingdom from behind the scenes. He turned to face her. And you're the leverage he'll use. As long as you're here, he can paint me as compromised. If I send you away, I prove he's right about me being weak. If I keep you close, he'll manufacture some crisis that forces me to choose between protecting you and protecting the kingdom. Lyra's stomach twisted. She'd survived assassins and the Thornwood, but politics? This was a different kind of predator. There's a third option, Draven continued. I could make you untouchable. Give you a position in the court that comes with its own authority and protection. Lady Consort, maybe. Or a formal military advisor role that Kessa could justify based on your survival skills. He paused. But all of that requires you to speak, to defend yourself in court, to play their games at least enough to not be dismissed as a voiceless curiosity. Lyra's hand moved unconsciously to her throat. I'm not asking you to break whatever vow keeps you silent, Draven said quietly. I'm trying to figure out how to keep you alive when half my court wants you gone and the other half wants to use you against me. He looked exhausted again, worn down by the weight of impossible choices. Lyra stepped closer and did something she hadn't done since her mother died. She reached out and took someone's hand, squeezed it once, a promise without words. I'm still here, I'm not running. Draven's fingers tightened around hers. Stubborn, he murmured, just like me. That night, everything went to hell. Lyra woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright, heart already racing. The side chamber was filling with gray haze, and through the door she could see flames licking up the main room's walls. Someone had set Draven's quarters on fire. She grabbed her boots and the knife Kessa had given her, wrapped a cloth around her face, and stumbled through the smoke toward the exit. The door was barred from outside. She could hear the wood groaning as she threw herself against it, but it didn't budge. Trapped. Lyra spun, looking for another way out. The window, barred, but the bars were old iron, might be weak. She grabbed a chair and smashed it against the bars. Once. Twice. The impact jarred her shoulders, but the bars held. The smoke was getting thicker. Her lungs burned. She hit the bars again, putting everything she had into it, and felt something give. One more hit and the bottom bar snapped free. Not much of an opening, but she was small. She could fit. Lyra squeezed through, scraping her shoulders raw, and dropped 15 feet to the courtyard below. She landed in a crouch, rolled to absorb the impact, came up with her knife ready. The courtyard was chaos, guards running, servants screaming, and in the center of it all, Draven fighting 3 armed men at once. No, not just men, soldiers. His own soldiers wearing the Ironhold insignia but with their faces covered. Betrayal from within. Lyra sprinted toward him without thinking, her forest-trained legs eating up the distance. One of the attackers saw her coming and broke off to intercept. He swung a sword that should have taken her head off, but she ducked under it and drove her knife into his thigh. Not fatal, but he went down hard. Lyra, run! Draven blocked a strike that would have killed him, then drove his blade through his attacker's chest. Get out of here! But more soldiers were pouring into the courtyard now, loyal ones, responding to the alarm. Kessa appeared at the head of a squad, her face twisted in fury. Protect the Alpha! Find the traitors! The battle devolved into brutal close-quarters fighting. Lyra pressed her back against a wall, trying to stay out of the way while tracking the flow of combat. She wasn't trained for this. Couldn't help. Could only watch as Draven moved like the monster from the stories, cutting down attackers with a precision that spoke of decades of practice. Then she saw him, Counselor Thorn, standing in a shadowed archway watching the chaos with cold satisfaction, and beside him carrying a crossbow already loaded and aimed, at Draven's exposed back. Lyra didn't think. She grabbed a fallen sword, heavier than her knife, awkward in her grip, and threw it like a spear. Her aim was terrible. The sword clattered harmlessly off the wall, but it was enough. Thorn turned, saw her, and his expression shifted from satisfaction to rage. He barked something at the crossbowman, who pivoted toward Lyra instead. The bolt flew. Someone slammed into Lyra from the side, driving her to the ground as the bolt punched through empty air where her chest had been. She looked up into Kessa's face. "Stay down!" the lieutenant shouted, then was up and moving, her sword already singing as she charged the crossbowman. Lyra stayed down for about 3 seconds. Then she saw Thorn slipping away through the archway, disappearing into the fortress's depths, and something in her snapped. She'd spent 5 years being invisible, being silent, surviving by never being seen. But this man had just tried to kill the one person who'd seen her and not demanded she be something different. The one person who'd asked her to stay instead of sending her away. Lyra ran. She followed Thorn through corridors she'd memorized during her weeks of exploration, keeping just far enough back to avoid detection. He moved with purpose, descending stairs that led to the fortress's lower levels, storage areas, dungeons, places most people never went. He stopped at a heavy door and knocked. A pattern, a code. The door opened. Voices inside, too low to make out words. Lyra pressed herself against the wall and edged closer. Failed. The Alpha survived. Then we moved to contingency. Thorn's voice. The southern kingdoms are already mobilizing. When they cross the border, the court will have no choice but to acknowledge the Alpha's incompetence. We'll force a vote of no confidence. And the girl? Dealt with. The fire should have finished her, but if not, we have other options. She's a loose thread. We cut her, and everything unravels. Lyra's blood ran cold. The southern kingdoms won't wait, another voice warned. If they breach the border before we've secured control of the council, they won't. I've assured King Aldrich that we'll deliver the Ironhold from within. All he has to do is apply enough pressure to make the Alpha look desperate. Treason, not just against Draven, but against the entire kingdom. Lyra needed to get this information back to Draven. Needed to... Her boots scraped against stone. The conversation inside stopped. Did you hear that? Lyra ran. She made it 10 feet before someone grabbed her from behind, an arm locking around her throat. She drove her elbow back, felt it connect with ribs, but the grip didn't loosen. Another man appeared in front of her, one of Thorn's personal guards. "Well," Thorn said, stepping into the corridor. "This is unfortunate. I'd hoped the fire would be cleaner." He nodded to his guards. "Take her to the cells. We'll decide what to do with her after the Southern Army crosses the border. Can't have her warning the Alpha about our arrangement." Lyra thrashed, bit, kicked, everything she'd learned in the forest and the training yard. She got one guard in the eye with her thumb, before the other one punched her in the stomach hard enough to drive out her air. They dragged her down the corridor through a door that led to the old dungeons, and threw her into a cell that smelled of rot and old death. The door slammed. Lock clicked. Darkness. Lyra sat up slowly, cataloging her injuries. Bruised ribs. Split knuckles. A cut on her forehead that dripped blood into her eye. But alive. Still breathing. She felt along the cell walls. Solid stone. The door was thick wood reinforced with iron. No window. No light except what filtered under the door from the corridor. A proper cage. She tested the door anyway, throwing her weight against it even though she knew it was useless. The wood didn't even creak. Time passed. Minutes? Hours? In the dark, it was impossible to tell. Then she heard footsteps. Multiple people. A voice she recognized, Thorn, giving orders. "Seal this level. No one comes down here without my authorization. Tell the Alpha she escaped in the chaos. With the fire and the attack, he'll believe it. He'll waste resources searching the forest while we consolidate. Counselor!" Running footsteps. Someone else arriving, breathless. "The Southern Army just crossed the border, 3,000 strong. They're moving fast. We'll reach the Ironhold in 2 days." 2 days? They weren't supposed to move until... Thorn cut himself off. "Doesn't matter. Send riders to the border lords. Tell them to fall back to the Ironhold for defense. Make it look like we're rallying, but slow the response. Let the South get close enough that the court sees how unprepared we are. And the Alpha is about to have a very bad week. When he fails to repel this invasion, the Council will have grounds to remove him. I'll be appointed regent until a proper successor can be chosen. The Southern Kingdoms get their treaty. We get stability. Everyone wins. Except Draven." "Except Draven," Thorn agreed. "But he brought this on himself. You don't rule a kingdom with your heart. You rule with steel and strategy. He forgot that." The footsteps retreated. The corridor fell silent again. Lyra sat in the darkness and understood, with perfect clarity, that she was going to die down here. Thorn would let her rot, and when the dust settled, no one would even remember to look for the mute girl from the forest. Draven would think she'd run, would believe she'd abandoned him when things got dangerous, and he'd face the southern invasion alone, betrayed by his own council, while the woman he'd tried to protect disappeared into a dark cell beneath his own fortress. Her fingers found the small clay jar in her pocket, the pain medicine Mira had given her weeks ago. She'd kept it out of habit, the way she'd kept useful things in the forest. An idea sparked. It was desperate, probably stupid, the kind of gamble that got people killed. But Lyra had been desperate before. She felt along the cell door until she found the gap between door and frame, barely wide enough to slip paper through, but maybe, just maybe. She opened the jar and smeared the medicine, thick, sticky, foul-smelling, along the gap. Then she waited. The medicine was made from concentrated herbs, pungent enough to make eyes water. If anyone passed close to the cell door, they'd smell it, might investigate, might open the door to see what was causing the stench. It was a long shot, but it was all she had. Hours crawled past. The medicine smell intensified in the enclosed space, making Lyra's eyes stream. Then, footsteps. A guard, doing rounds. The steps slowed near her cell, stopped. What the hell is that smell? Keys rattled. The door cracked open and a guard's face appeared, silhouetted against torchlight. You sick or something? Counselor said not to... Lyra hit him with the ceramic jar, which shattered against his temple. He went down hard. She grabbed his sword, his keys, and ran. The corridor was empty. Thorn had cleared the level, confident in his victory. Lyra sprinted up the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. She emerged into the main fortress and nearly ran straight into a patrol. She ducked into a side corridor, pressing herself into shadows while they passed, then kept moving. She had to find Draven. Had to warn him about Thorn, about the Southern Army, about all of it. But the fortress was on high alert after the fire and attack. Guards everywhere, checking everyone, questioning anyone who looked out of place. And Lyra, covered in blood and grime and carrying a stolen sword, looked extremely out of place. She made it to the main keep's entrance before someone shouted, "There, stop her!" Lyra ran harder, but there were too many. They converged from 3 directions, cutting off escape routes. She backed against a wall, sword raised, knowing this was it. She was trapped. Again. "Stand down!" Kessa's voice cut through the chaos. The lieutenant pushed through the guards, took one look at Lyra, and her expression turned thunderous. "Where the hell have you been? The Alpha thinks you're dead." Lyra grabbed Kessa's arm and pulled, trying to convey urgency, danger, betrayal. "You need to... Wait, slow down." Kessa gripped her shoulders. "Lyra, I can't understand if you don't..." Lyra did something she hadn't done in 5 years. She opened her mouth and screamed, not words, just sound. Pure, raw, desperate sound that tore from her throat like a wounded animal. It echoed through the stone corridors, silencing everything, everyone. The guards stared. Kessa's eyes went wide. And then Lyra did something even more impossible. She forced the word out. It felt like dragging glass through her throat, like breaking a bone that had healed wrong and needed to be reset. 5 years of silence, 5 years of vows and armor and protection. Draven. Her voice was hoarse, cracked, barely recognizable as human, but it was there. "Draven?" she said again, and pointed toward the council chambers. "Thorn, traitor, army." Kessa's face went white. "Oh, hell." She grabbed 2 guards. "You! Get the Alpha now! You! Lock down the fortress! No one leaves! Move!" They scattered. Kessa pulled Lyra into a run. "Can you speak? Can you tell me what happened?" "Thorn," Lyra's voice scraped like rust. "Southern Kingdoms. Army. 2 days. Thorn's working with the South?" Kessa swore viciously. "That scheming bastard. Where's the proof? We need evidence or the council will..." "Dungeons," Lyra managed. "Documents. Guards. His guards." They burst into the council chamber, where a handful of counselors were already gathering for an emergency session. Thorn was there, looking composed and concerned, until he saw Lyra. His mask slipped for just a second, long enough. "Seize him," Kessa ordered. "On what grounds?" Thorn demanded. "Lieutenant, you overstep your..." "On grounds of high treason." Draven's voice froze everyone in place. He entered the chamber, blood-stained and furious, his pale eyes locked on Thorn. I just received a very interesting report from my lieutenant. Something about southern armies and secret meetings, and a girl who was supposed to be dead. He crossed to Lyra in 3 strides, and she saw relief crack through his control. You're alive. She nodded, her ruined voice failing her now that she'd used it. She spoke, Kessa said quietly. Broke 5 years of silence to warn you. Draven's jaw tightened. He looked at Lyra, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Recognition of what that cost. Then he turned to Thorn, and his expression went cold. Talk, Draven said. And maybe I'll make your execution quick. But Thorn just smiled, calm, confident. You're already too late, he said. The Southern Army will be here in 2 days. Your border lords won't respond in time, I've made sure of that. And when the South breaches your walls, the kingdom will see exactly what kind of king you really are. Weak, distracted, unfit to rule. You sold out the kingdom because you thought I was distracted? I sold out a failing kingdom to save it from a king who put his personal feelings above the survival of his people. Thorn's eyes glittered. You want to know what your father's mistake was? He thought love and honor mattered more than power, and it got him killed. You're making the same mistake with her. He pointed at Lyra. That worthless mute has destroyed everything you built. And even now, even knowing what it's cost you, you can't let her go. That's not strength, Alpha. That's weakness, and weakness kills kingdoms. Silence filled the council chamber. Then Draven moved so fast Lyra almost missed it. One moment he was standing still. The next, his hand was around Thorn's throat, lifting the counselor off his feet. You're right about one thing, Draven said, his voice deadly quiet. Love can be weakness, but you know what's weaker? Betraying your kingdom because you're too proud to admit someone else sees strength in places you're too blind to look. He threw Thorn against the council table hard enough to crack wood. Lock him in the cells, strip his titles, seize his assets. Draven's command rang with absolute authority. And someone get me a goddamned status report on that Southern Army. If they're 2 days out, we have work to do. The council chamber exploded into motion. Counselors scrambling, guards hauling Thorn away, runners dispatched to rally the fortress. Draven pulled Lyra aside into a quiet alcove away from the chaos. You spoke, he said, and his hands were gentle as they tilted her face up to examine the bruises forming on her jaw. You broke your vow. Lyra's throat worked. She tried to speak again, but nothing came out except a pained rasp. Don't, Draven said immediately. Don't hurt yourself more. I heard you. That's enough. But Lyra shook her head. She'd broken the armor once. Might as well finish it. She forced the words out, each one agony. Not for you, she whispered. For me. My choice. Draven's eyes widened slightly. Understanding. She hadn't broken her vow because he asked. She'd broken it because she chose to, because surviving meant more than just breathing. It meant protecting the things and people that made survival worth it. The Southern Army, Draven started. Will fail, Lyra interrupted, her voice getting slightly stronger. You won't, not while I'm here. You can barely stand. Neither could you, after Redstone. Her smile was small, pained. We're both stubborn. Despite everything, the betrayal, the approaching army, the blood and fire and chaos, Draven almost laughed. Yeah, he said, we are. Kessa appeared in the alcove entrance. Alpha, the War Council is assembled. They're waiting for you. Draven nodded, then looked back at Lyra. Can you? I'll manage, she whispered. That's not what I was going to ask. He squeezed her hand once. I was going to ask if you'd sit in on the council. You've earned it, and... He paused. I could use someone who sees clearly when everyone else is panicking. Lyra stared at him. He was asking her, the mute forest girl, the worthless outcast, to help plan the defense of his kingdom. She nodded. They walked into the War Council together, and Lyra saw the shocked faces of the assembled commanders and counselors. Saw them look at her, bloodied, bruised, but standing beside their alpha, like she belonged there. This is Lyra Vane, Draven announced. She just exposed a traitor in our midst, and likely saved this kingdom from collapsing from within. She'll be joining our councils going forward. Anyone have a problem with that? Silence. Good. Now let's talk about how we're going to crush a Southern army with half our border forces deliberately delayed and 2 days to prepare. Maps were spread. Scouts reported. Strategies debated. And Lyra, her voice still raw but functional, contributed. Pointed out defensive positions in the mountain passes that regular soldiers would have missed. Suggested supply routes that couldn't be easily cut. Drew on 5 years of survival knowledge to shore up plans that relied too heavily on perfect conditions. By dawn, they had a strategy. Desperate, dangerous, but possible. As the council dispersed to implement preparations, Draven pulled Lyra aside one more time. "This is going to be bad," he said quietly. "Even with our plan, we're outnumbered 2-1. People are going to die." "I know," Lyra whispered, "and there's a chance we don't win, that the South breaks through and takes the fortress." "I know that too." Draven's hand cupped her face. "If that happens, if it looks like we're going to fall, I need you to run. Don't stay and fight. Don't try to help. Just disappear into your forest and survive. Promise me." Lyra met his eyes. Her voice was steady when she answered, "No." "Lyra, I spent 5 years running. 5 years surviving alone because it was safer than trusting anyone." Her hand covered his. "I'm done running. Whatever happens, we face it together." "That's not your choice?" She smiled slightly. "Neither is this. You don't get to send me away to keep me safe. That's not how this works." Draven stared at her for a long moment. Then he leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers, just breathing, just existing in the same space one more time before the storm hit. "Stubborn woman," he murmured. "Learn from the best," she whispered back. Outside, the first light of dawn painted the sky red. In 2 days, the Southern Army would arrive. And Lyra Vane, the worthless mute who'd survived alone in the Thornwood, who'd been dragged to the Ironhold as a curiosity, who'd broken 5 years of silence to save a kingdom that had never wanted her, would stand beside the Alpha King and prove that sometimes the strongest weapon wasn't rage or fear or violence. Sometimes it was choosing to stay when everyone expected you to run. Sometimes it was choosing to stay when everyone expected you to run. The fortress transformed into a war machine in those 2 days. Every able body worked. Soldiers reinforced defensive positions. Smiths forged weapons around the clock. And servants stockpiled food and water for a siege that might last weeks. The air tasted like metal and desperation. Lyra worked alongside them, her voice still rough but functional. She showed archers how to make forest-style snares that could slow advancing troops. Taught scouts the tracking methods she'd used to avoid detection for 5 years. Drew maps of the mountain passes from memory, marking every hidden trail and choke point she'd discovered during her years in the Thornwood. Commander Voss, a grizzled veteran with more scars than teeth, studied her maps with narrowed eyes. "These trails," he said, tapping a route that wound behind the southern approach. "You're certain they exist?" "Used them myself," Lyra rasped. 3 winters ago, deer path mostly, but wide enough for men." Voss looked at Draven. "If she's right, we could flank their main column. Hit them from behind while they're engaged at the pass." "She's right," Draven said without hesitation. "Deploy 2 units. Light armor. Fast strike." "Alpha, with respect," another commander started. "She survived 5 years in those mountains alone," Draven interrupted. "I trust her knowledge more than speculation. Deploy the units." The commanders exchanged glances but nodded. Orders were given. Soldiers mobilized. Lyra caught Kessa watching her from across the war table, a small smile on the lieutenant's face. "What?" Lyra whispered. "Nothing. Just 3 weeks ago, you were a terrified girl covered in deer blood. Now you're planning military strategies with the Alpha's inner circle." Kessa's smile widened. "It's quite the transformation." "Still terrified," Lyra admitted, "just better at hiding it." "That's all warfare is, controlled terror." Kessa clapped her shoulder. "You're learning fast." That night, Lyra stood on the eastern rampart again, watching torches mark the Ironhold's defenses like fireflies against the dark. Somewhere out there, 3,000 Southern soldiers were marching through those same mountains, believing they were about to take a fractured kingdom by force. They had no idea what was waiting for them. "Can't sleep either?" She turned. Draven joined her at the wall, his armor already on, ready for battle, even though dawn was hours away. "Thinking," Lyra said, her voice a little stronger each time she used it. "About? How strange it is. Being here. Being part of something." She looked at him. "I spent 5 years avoiding exactly this. People. Conflict. Caring about anything beyond the next meal." "Regret it?" Lyra considered. In the forest, she'd been safe, invisible, free from the pain that came with connection. But she'd also been alone, half alive, surviving without living. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it." Draven's hand found hers on the cold stone. "Tomorrow's going to be brutal. Even with our preparations, we're gambling on timing and terrain. If the Southern Army adapts faster than we anticipate, they won't. You sound certain." "I am." Lyra squeezed his hand. "They're expecting a broken kingdom, a distracted king, easy victory. They're not expecting us to be ready. That advantage alone is worth 1,000 soldiers." "Is that forest wisdom or blind optimism?" "Both." She smiled slightly. "You taught me that. Survival isn't just preparation. It's making your enemy believe you're weaker than you are, then proving them catastrophically wrong." Draven laughed, actual laughter, rare and genuine. "When did you become a strategist?" "When I had something worth fighting for." The laughter faded. Draven turned to face her fully, his hands cupping her face like she was something precious that might shatter. "After this is over," he said quietly, "assuming we survive." "We will." "I want to do this properly, not political marriages or alliances, not because you're useful or symbolic." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "I want you beside me because you're the only person in this entire kingdom who sees me as something other than a weapon. Who reminds me I'm still human under all the armor and rage." Lyra's throat tightened. "I'm still a peasant from Ashwick, still worthless in their eyes. You broke 5 years of silence to save this kingdom. You exposed a traitor and probably prevented a civil war." Draven's smile was small but real. "Anyone who thinks you're worthless is a fool, and I don't keep fools in my court. Your council will adapt or be replaced." His voice hardened. "I'm done letting fear of perception dictate my choices. Thorn was right about one thing. My father died because he let honor cloud his judgment. But he was wrong about what that means. Strength isn't abandoning everything human. It's choosing what matters and defending it with everything you have." He leaned his forehead against hers. "You matter, Lyra, more than territory or treaties or the opinions of soft lords who've never bled for anything. So after we win tomorrow, and we will win, I'm making you my formal consort, with full authority and protection. Let them whisper. Let them plot. I'm done pretending I don't care." Lyra's eyes burned. She'd run from one man trying to sell her, survived alone to avoid being owned by anyone, and somehow ended up here, being chosen, truly chosen, by someone who saw her as an equal rather than property. "Ask me," she whispered. "What?" "Don't tell me what you're going to do. Ask me." Her hand covered his. "Give me the choice." Understanding dawned in Draven's eyes. He pulled back slightly, and when he spoke, his voice was formal but threaded with warmth. "Lyra Vane, after we crush the Southern Army and secure the kingdom, assuming you don't get yourself killed being stupidly brave, would you consent to stand beside me? Not as a subject, not as a possession, but as my equal and partner in ruling this broken kingdom." Lyra's smile was radiant, despite the tears tracking down her face. "Yes," she said, "I would." Draven kissed her then, gentle and fierce all at once, a promise sealed on a rampart while war drums echoed in the distance. When they finally pulled apart, Lyra's voice was steady. "Now, let's go win a war." Dawn broke red and angry over the mountains. The Southern Army arrived exactly when the scouts predicted, 3,000 strong, with siege equipment and enough supplies for a prolonged campaign. They arranged themselves in the valley below the Ironhold, their banners snapping in the wind, their armor gleaming. Impressive, intimidating, exactly what they wanted. Lyra stood in the war room with Draven's inner circle, watching through the high windows as the enemy positioned themselves. "They're confident," Commander Voss observed. "Too confident." "Good," Draven said. "Confidence breeds mistakes." A runner burst in. "Alpha, the Southern commander is requesting parley, under truce banner. Let him come?" 20 minutes later, a Southern general strode into the war room with 2 guards flanking him. He was older, weathered, with the look of a professional soldier rather than a political appointee. "Alpha King Draven," the general said, his tone respectful but firm. "I am General Aldrich of the Southern Coalition. I've been authorized to offer terms." "I'm listening." "Surrender the Ironhold peacefully. Abdicate your crown in favor of a coalition government. In return, you and your senior commanders will be granted safe passage to the border territories. You'll live. Your people won't suffer a siege. Draven's expression didn't change. And if I refuse? Then we take the fortress by force. We outnumber you 2-1. We have siege equipment. Your border lords haven't responded to your calls for reinforcement. We made sure of that. Aldrich spread his hands. This doesn't have to be a bloodbath, Alpha. You've ruled well, but your kingdom is fracturing. Let us help stabilize it before it tears itself apart. Generous, Draven said dryly. Tell me, General, how much did Counselor Thorn promise you for this little arrangement? Aldrich's mask cracked slightly. I don't know what... Don't insult my intelligence. Thorn contacted your king 6 months ago, promised to deliver the Ironhold from within in exchange for favorable treaties and land concessions. He delayed my border lords' responses, spread rumors about my instability, and manufactured a crisis to make you look like saviors instead of invaders. The general's jaw tightened. That's speculation. It's fact. Thorn confessed before I had him locked in the dungeons. Draven leaned forward. So here's my counteroffer. Turn your army around. March back across the border. And I'll forget this incursion ever happened. Refuse, and I'll destroy you so thoroughly that the southern kingdoms won't dare look north for a generation. Aldrich actually laughed. With what army? You have maybe 1,500 soldiers. We have 3,000. Numbers aren't everything. In siege warfare, they're most of it. The general's expression hardened. I'll give you until sunset to reconsider. After that, we attack. And we will take this fortress, Alpha. One way or another. He turned and left, his guards following. When the door closed, Kessa exhaled slowly. Well, that could have gone better. Actually, Lyra said quietly, it went perfectly. Everyone looked at her. He's overconfident, she continued, her voice gaining strength. Thinks he has us trapped. Doesn't expect resistance. That means he'll commit his forces in a standard siege formation, focusing on the main gate and walls. And, Voss prompted, and while he's doing that, our flanking units can use the mountain trails to hit his supply lines and rear positions. Lyra traced the paths on the map. In the forest, when hunting large prey, you don't attack from the front. You circle, harass. Make them expend energy chasing shadows while you control the terrain. We're talking about an army, not a deer, one of the commanders muttered. Same principle, Lyra shot back. They're in our mountains, our territory. We know every trail, every choke point, every place where 20 men can hold off 200. They don't. Draven studied the map, his expression calculating. How long can we hold the main gate? Against siege equipment? Maybe 2 days if we're lucky, Voss said. We don't need 2 days, we need 6 hours. Draven looked at his assembled commanders. Here's what we're going to do. The battle began at sunset, just as General Aldrich promised. The Southern Army advanced with professional precision, siege towers rolling toward the walls, archers providing cover fire, infantry in tight formations. It looked unstoppable. For the first hour, it looked like the Ironhold would fall. Lyra stood on the wall with Kessa's unit, firing arrows into the advancing troops. Her forest-learned accuracy served her well. Every shot found gaps in armor, weak points, vulnerable flesh. Men fell. But more came. Always more. They're going to breach the outer wall, someone shouted. Hold position, Kessa roared back. Trust the plan. Then, from the mountains, horns sounded. The flanking units struck like wolves descending on scattered sheep. They hit the Southern Army's rear positions hard and fast, setting fire to supply wagons, cutting down officers, creating chaos where there should have been order. General Aldrich's formation wavered as he tried to respond to threats from multiple directions. Now, Draven's voice carried across the battlefield. The main gates opened and heavy cavalry poured out. Not a desperate last stand, but a calculated strike at the exact moment when the enemy was disorganized and vulnerable. Draven led the charge, his black warhorse thundering through enemy lines, his blade cutting a path of absolute destruction. Lyra watched from the walls as the battle turned, as the Southern Army, so confident hours ago, began to break under assault from terrain and tactics they hadn't anticipated. But war was never clean. A stray arrow punched through the stones near her head. She ducked, rolled, came up to see Southern soldiers scaling the walls with ladders. They'd breached. Defenders to the wall, Kessa shouted, already moving to intercept. Lyra grabbed a fallen sword, still clumsy with it, still not trained properly, and threw herself into the fight. A Southern soldier swung at her head. She blocked barely, her arm shaking with the impact. Another soldier flanked her, blade already descending. Kessa's sword took him in the throat. "Stay behind me," the lieutenant ordered. But Lyra had spent 5 years learning that survival meant adapting, meant using every advantage. She wasn't a trained soldier. Fine. But she was small, fast, and expendable in a way Kessa wasn't. She ducked under the next attack, drove her blade into an enemy soldier's knee, and when he fell, kicked him off the wall. Not elegant, not honorable, but effective. The fighting on the walls was brutal and close. Blood made the stone slippery. Screams filled the air. Lyra fought with everything she had, defending the fortress that had become her home alongside soldiers who'd learned to respect the silent girl from the forest. Below, Draven's cavalry had shattered the southern infantry's formation. The flanking units were systematically destroying supply lines. And slowly, inexorably, the southern army began to retreat. Not a rout. Not yet. But definitely a withdrawal. General Aldrich, realizing his perfect siege had become a nightmare, sounded the retreat horn. The southern army pulled back, dragging their wounded, abandoning siege equipment, disappearing into the mountain passes with the Ironhold's cavalry harrying their retreat. By the time full dark fell, the battlefield was eerily quiet, except for the moans of the wounded and dying. Lyra sat on the wall, her sword across her knees, and watched the fortress below come alive with activity. Healers rushing to tend the injured, soldiers securing the perimeter, servants already beginning the grim work of clearing bodies. They'd won. Against 3-to-1 odds, with half their forces deliberately sabotaged, they'd won. Kessa dropped down beside her, breathing hard, covered in blood that wasn't hers. "You're insane," the lieutenant said. "Completely insane." "You know that?" Lyra's laugh was more of a wheeze. "Learned from the best. Your tactics worked. The flanking maneuver, the terrain advantage, it turned the whole battle." Kessa shook her head. "The commanders were skeptical. Now they're calling you a tactical genius." "I just remembered how I used to hunt." "Well, you just hunted a southern army." Kessa offered her a water skin. "Drink. You've earned it." They sat there for a while, two women from completely different worlds, united by survival and shared violence. Below, torches began to light the courtyard as Draven's cavalry returned, victorious and exhausted. Lyra saw him dismount, still alive, still whole, and felt something in her chest finally unclench. "Come on," Kessa said, helping her stand. "Let's go see if our fearless leader remembered not to get himself killed." They made their way down from the walls, through corridors packed with celebrating soldiers, into the main courtyard where Draven was giving orders to his commanders. He looked up as they approached, and despite the blood and exhaustion, he smiled. "Told you we'd win," Lyra rasped. "You were right." He pulled her into an embrace that probably hurt both their bruised ribs, but neither cared. "Your tactics saved us. Voss says the flanking maneuver was devastating. They underestimated us. They underestimated you." Draven pulled back to look at her. The mute forest girl who couldn't possibly understand warfare just dismantled an army twice our size using terrain and timing. "I had help. You had an idea. We just executed it." He turned to address the assembled commanders and soldiers. "Everyone hear me. Today we won because we stopped seeing weakness where there was strength. Because we listened to knowledge that came from survival rather than textbooks. Because one woman who spent 5 years alone in the mountains understood warfare better than most career soldiers." He gestured to Lyra. "This is Lyra Vane. She exposed the traitor in our midst. She planned the strategy that won this battle. And effective immediately, she is my formal consort and military advisor. Anyone have a problem with that?" The courtyard was silent for a heartbeat. Then Kessa started clapping. Slowly at first, then louder. Other soldiers joined in. Then more. Until the entire courtyard thundered with applause and cheers. Lyra stood there, overwhelmed, while soldiers who'd dismissed her weeks ago now saluted. Commanders who doubted her tactics now nodded with respect. Servants who'd avoided her now smiled. She'd gone from worthless outcast to recognized leader in the space of 2 days. It didn't feel real. "Speech!" someone shouted. "Speech!" others echoed. Lyra's throat closed. Public speaking had never been on her survival skills list. She looked at Draven helplessly. He just smiled. "Your choice. Always." She took a breath. Her voice was still rough, still recovering from 5 years of silence, but it was hers. "I'm not a soldier," she said, and the courtyard quieted to hear her. "I'm not trained. I don't know formations or tactics the way you do. I just know how to survive,
how to use the land, how to make enemies underestimate you until it's too late. She looked around at the faces watching her, some curious, some skeptical, most respectful. This kingdom underestimated me, called me worthless because I couldn't speak, dismissed me because I came from nothing. Her voice strengthened. But I'm still here, still standing, and so are all of you, because we stopped listening to people who said we were weak and started proving them wrong. Cheers erupted. Lyra stepped back, embarrassed by the attention. Draven's hand found hers. Not bad for your first speech, he murmured. Terrible, she corrected, but I survived it. You do more than survive, Lyra. You win. The celebration continued around them, soldiers drinking, singing, releasing the tension of battle. But Lyra felt exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. She'd been running on adrenaline for days. Now, finally safe, her body was demanding rest. Come on, Draven said, reading her fatigue. Let's get you cleaned up and fed. Tomorrow we deal with the aftermath. Tonight, we just breathe. They made their way to his quarters. Their quarters now, she supposed. Servants had already prepared a bath, laid out clean clothes, set food on the table. Luxury felt strange after the battlefield. Lyra washed quickly, scrubbing away blood and grime, then dressed in soft clothes that didn't smell like death. When she emerged, Draven was at the war table, already reviewing reports. You should rest too, she said. I will. Just need to... He stopped, looked at her, and set down the papers. You're right. It can wait. They ate in comfortable silence, too tired for conversation. Then Draven led her to the bed, actually large enough for two people, and they lay down, still dressed, just existing in the same space. Thank you, Draven said quietly, for staying, for fighting, for choosing this kingdom when you could have run. Thank you for giving me a reason to stay. They fell asleep like that, two survivors who'd found something worth protecting in each other, while outside the fortress walls, the mountains stood watch, and the stars wheeled overhead. When morning came, there would be wounded to tend, prisoners to negotiate, a kingdom to rebuild. Thorn would need to be tried. The southern kingdoms would need new treaties. The court would need restructuring. But for now, in the quiet dark, Lyra Vane, former outcast, current consort, proven strategist, simply rested. She'd survived the Thornwood alone. She'd survived the Ironhold's politics. She'd survived a battle against impossible odds. And tomorrow, when the sun rose on a kingdom that had finally recognized her worth, she'd prove that surviving was just the beginning. Now came the part where she helped it thrive. Morning arrived with unexpected gentleness, soft light filtering through the windows, the fortress quiet except for distant sounds of reconstruction. Lyra woke before Draven, her body still aching from yesterday's battle, but her mind sharper than it had been in weeks. She stood at the window and watched the courtyard below. Soldiers already working to repair damaged walls, healers moving between the wounded, and in the center of it all, a gallows being constructed. For Thorn. The trial was set for noon. Draven stirred behind her. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. Lyra's voice was still rough but getting stronger each day. Kept thinking about what happens next. Thorn gets executed. The southern kingdoms negotiate terms. We rebuild. He joined her at the window, still half asleep. Standard post-war procedure. Is it? Draven looked at her. What do you mean? Thorn betrayed you because he thought you were weak. The southern kingdoms invaded because they believed it. Your own court questioned your judgment. Lyra turned to face him. Executing one traitor doesn't fix the underlying problem. People still see you as volatile, unpredictable, one bad decision away from becoming your father. They're wrong, are they? She held his gaze. You almost choked Thorn to death in front of the entire council. You've executed generals for hesitation. You rule through fear because it's the only thing that's worked. But fear doesn't build kingdoms that last. It just delays the next rebellion. Draven's jaw tightened. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we use this moment to change things. Show them you're not just a weapon. That you can be strategic without being brutal. Strong without being terrifying. And how exactly do we do that? Lyra smiled slightly. We start with Thorn's trial, and we make it about justice, not vengeance. The council chamber was packed for the trial. Every lord, lady, commander, and courtier who could fit crammed into the space, eager to witness the fallen counselor's judgment. The air buzzed with anticipation and bloodlust.
Thorn stood in the center, shackled but composed. He'd cleaned up since the dungeons, probably allowed to, for appearance's sake. He looked almost dignified, which Lyra suspected was intentional. Martyrs needed to look the part. Draven sat at the high table with his senior counselors flanking him. Lyra stood behind his chair, a position that had caused some murmuring, but no one dared object. Not after yesterday. Counselor Thorn, Draven began, his voice formal. You stand accused of high treason, conspiracy with foreign powers, attempted murder, sabotage of kingdom defenses. How do you answer these charges? Guilty, Thorn said calmly. To all of it. The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. No one had expected him to confess so readily. Then you admit you betrayed your king and kingdom? Draven pressed. I admit I tried to save both from a ruler who'd lost his way. Thorn's voice carried despite the shackles. I admit I contacted the southern kingdoms because I believed a coalition government would bring stability. This fractured kingdom desperately needs. I admit I saw your obsession with that girl. He nodded toward Lyra, as proof you'd become exactly what I feared. Weak, sentimental, unfit. Careful, Draven warned. Why? You're going to execute me regardless. Might as well speak truth in my final hours. Thorn looked around the chamber. You all see it. You all know it. The Alpha King who once crushed rebellions without hesitation now keeps a peasant girl in his bed and takes her tactical advice over trained commanders. It's pathetic. The chamber went dead silent. Lyra felt eyes turning to her, measuring, judging. This was Thorn's play. Make her the issue, not his betrayal. Divide the court one final time. You're right, she said. Everyone stared. I am a peasant. No training. No noble blood. No reason to be here except that your Alpha King saw value where others saw worthlessness. Lyra stepped forward, her voice carrying. But let me tell you what this peasant girl did while you were plotting treason. I exposed your conspiracy. I broke 5 years of silence to warn this kingdom. I planned the tactics that won yesterday's battle against an army you helped arrange. She moved closer to Thorn. You say the Alpha is weak for caring about me. I say you're weak for thinking power and brutality are the same thing. He's twice the ruler you'd ever be because he understands something you never will. Strength isn't about crushing everything that makes you human. It's about protecting what matters even when it's difficult. Pretty speech, Thorn sneered, but it doesn't change. I'm not finished. Lyra's voice hardened. You betrayed this kingdom because you couldn't imagine a different kind of strength. But I've seen it. In the forest, the strongest predators aren't always the biggest or most violent. They're the ones who adapt, who protect their territory, who know when to fight and when to show mercy. She looked at Draven. Execute him if you want. He deserves it. But that just proves his point, that you're ruled by rage and vengeance. Or, she paused, you could show this court something they've never seen. Mercy, strategy, a punishment that serves the kingdom instead of just satisfying your anger. The chamber erupted in argument, half shouting for execution, half curious where this was going. Draven raised a hand for silence. His expression was unreadable. What would you suggest? He asked Lyra. Strip his titles, seize his assets, but don't kill him. Lyra kept her voice steady. Send him to the border territories. Let him see firsthand what happens in the places he was so eager to sell out. Make him work to rebuild what his betrayal damaged. Give him a chance to earn redemption through service instead of dying a martyr. That's madness, someone shouted. He tried to destroy us. And killing him makes him a symbol, Lyra countered. A noble counselor executed by a brutal king, but exile, forced labor, that's just a traitor facing consequences. No glory, no martyrdom, just accountability. Thorn's face had gone pale. Death would be quick. This would be years of humiliation. Draven studied Lyra for a long moment. Then he looked at Thorn. The girl makes a compelling argument, and I find myself tired of executing people to prove points. He stood. Thorn, I strip you of all titles, lands, and holdings. Your assets are forfeit to the crown. You're hereby exiled to the eastern border territories, where you'll serve under Commander Voss's authority, rebuilding the infrastructure your sabotage damaged. 20 years of service, minimum. If you survive that long, we'll discuss whether you've earned the right to die on your own terms instead of in disgrace. Thorn's composure finally cracked. You can't. I can, and I have. Remove him. Guards dragged Thorn from the chamber. his protests fading as he disappeared into the fortress depths. The assembled court sat in stunned silence. Then Counselor Sarah stood. Alpha, if I may, that was unexpectedly wise. Credit my consort, Draven said. She seems to understand strategy better than most of us. Sarah looked at Lyra with new respect. Indeed, perhaps we've all underestimated her. Other counselors murmured agreement. Not all of them. Lyra could see faces that still doubted, still resented, but enough. Enough to shift the momentum. Now, Draven continued, let's discuss the southern kingdoms. General Aldrich is still camped in the valley, waiting to negotiate. Suggestions? The council session lasted 3 hours, hammering out terms for a treaty that would keep the South from invading again without bankrupting the kingdom in concessions. Lyra contributed when she had insight, stayed quiet when she didn't. Learning, adapting, surviving in a new kind of wilderness. When it finally ended, Draven pulled her aside. That was risky, he said, advocating for mercy. Half the court thinks you're naive, and the other half thinks you might be the smartest person in the room. He smiled. Including me. Thorn would have died a martyr. Now he's just a cautionary tale. You didn't have to listen to me. Yes, I did. Because you were right. I've been ruling through fear for so long, I forgot there were other options. Draven took her hand. You're changing me, making me remember who I was before all the war and violence. Is that good? I don't know yet, but I'm willing to find out. 3 days later, the Southern Kingdoms signed a peace treaty. General Aldrich met Draven in the valley under truce banners, and to everyone's surprise, the negotiations were civil, professional. The South would pay reparations for the invasion. The kingdoms would establish formal trade agreements, and both sides would maintain neutral buffer zones along the border. No one got everything they wanted, but everyone got enough to justify peace over continued war. Your reputation precedes you, Aldrich said as they sealed the treaty with blood and ink. I expected the beast from the stories. Instead, I find a king who understands diplomacy. Credit my advisors, Draven replied. They've been teaching me that there's more than one way to be strong. Aldrich's eyes flicked to Lyra, standing with Kessa and the other commanders. The forest girl, I heard about her. Heard she planned the tactics that broke my formation. She did. Impressive. We underestimated your forces. Won't make that mistake again. The general extended his hand. I hope this peace holds, Alpha. The borderlands have seen enough blood. Draven shook it. Agreed. They parted as allies instead of enemies. Not friends, too much blood for that, but no longer actively trying to kill each other. Progress. That night, the fortress celebrated properly. Not the desperate relief of surviving a battle, but genuine joy at securing peace. Wine flowed. Music played. Soldiers danced with servants. Commanders laughed with courtiers. And for a few hours, the rigid hierarchy of the Ironhold relaxed. Lyra stood on a balcony overlooking the celebration, nursing a cup of wine and feeling oddly disconnected. A month ago, she'd been alone in the forest, trusting no one, needing nothing. Now she was consort to a king, advisor to a council, surrounded by people who'd learned to see her as something other than worthless. It should feel like victory. Instead, it felt surreal. There you are. She turned. Draven joined her on the balcony, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. He'd actually removed his armor, was wearing just a shirt and pants like a normal person. Needed air, she explained. The celebration too loud? Too much. Lyra struggled to articulate it. A month ago, I was invisible. Now people bow when I pass. Ask my opinion. Treat me like I matter. It's overwhelming. You do matter. I know. But knowing and feeling are different things. She looked at him. In the forest, I knew my place, knew the rules. Here, I'm still learning, still making mistakes. We all are. That's just life in a court. Draven leaned against the balcony rail. You're doing better than most. Sarah told me today that she thinks you should have a formal position on the council. Military advisor, specifically. Lyra's eyes widened. I'm not qualified. You planned the tactics that saved us. You understand terrain and strategy in ways traditional soldiers don't. You're absolutely qualified. He paused. But it's your choice. Always. You can say no. Lyra considered. A month ago, the idea of sitting on a royal council would have been laughable. Now,
I'll think about it, she said finally. Fair enough. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the celebration below. Lyra noticed Kessa dancing with one of the commanders, both of them laughing. Noticed servants sitting at tables with soldiers, boundaries temporarily dissolved by wine and relief. It's different, she said softly. The fortress. Since the battle. How so? Less afraid. People smile more, even the servants. She glanced at him. That's because of you. Because you showed mercy with Thorn, because you chose peace over more war. They're starting to see you as more than just a weapon. Is that what you see? Lyra turned to face him fully. I see someone who's been fighting so long he forgot there were other options. Someone who built armor so thick he couldn't feel anything. But underneath all that, she placed her hand over his heart. I see someone who still remembers how to be human, who chooses to protect instead of just destroy, who's brave enough to change even when it's terrifying. Draven's hand covered hers. You see all that? I do. Then you see me better than I see myself. He pulled her close. Stay with me. Not just tonight, but always. Help me build something better than what my father left. Help me prove that strength and mercy aren't opposites. I'm still learning, Lyra warned. Still making mistakes. I'm not some perfect advisor or consort. I'm just a girl who survived the forest. That girl outsmarted my entire court and saved a kingdom. I think I'll take my chances. He kissed her, gentle and sure, and Lyra felt something inside her finally settle. The fear that had driven her into the forest. The belief that trusting anyone would destroy her. It hadn't disappeared entirely. Probably never would. But it had quieted. Made room for something else. Hope, maybe. Or possibility. 2 weeks later, Lyra stood in the council chamber wearing formal clothes that still felt foreign. The assembled counselors watched as Draven addressed the court. As you all know, Counselor Thorn's betrayal left a vacancy on this council, a position of significant authority and responsibility. He gestured to Lyra. I'm appointing Lyra Vane as our new military advisor. She'll oversee tactical planning, border defenses, and coordination with our field commanders. Some faces looked approving, others skeptical. One lord, an older man named Garrett, actually stood. With respect, Alpha, she's been here less than 2 months. Has no formal training, no noble lineage. Appointing her to such a critical position saved this kingdom from invasion, Draven interrupted. Exposed a traitor. Planned the tactics that won an impossible battle. What credentials would you prefer, Lord Garrett? A fancy title? Years of book learning that never faced real combat? Garrett's jaw worked. I simply question whether... I grew up hunting, Lyra said quietly, surprising herself. The chamber quieted to hear her. Alone, in mountains that killed most people who tried to cross them. I learned to read terrain, anticipate movement, use every advantage I had because I didn't have the luxury of mistakes. She met Garrett's eyes. You're right that I'm not trained, not noble, not what you expect from someone in this position. But I know how to survive, how to turn weakness into strength. How to make enemies underestimate you until it's too late. And apparently that's valuable enough that your Alpha King wants me here, so you can question my credentials all you want. But the results speak for themselves. Garrett sat down slowly. Counselor Sarah actually smiled. Well said. I second the appointment. Third, another counselor added. The vote was unanimous. Not because they all believed in her, Lyra could see the doubt in some faces, but because opposing the Alpha King after he'd just secured peace would be politically stupid. She'd take it. Welcome to the council, Advisor Vane, Draven said formally. Then, quieter, just for her. Proud of you. Lyra's throat tightened. She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The council session continued, moving through border security updates, trade negotiations, reconstruction plans. Lyra contributed when relevant, listened carefully when not, and slowly began to understand the rhythm of governance. It was different from forest survival, more complex, but the principles were the same. Watch, learn, adapt, survive. Afterward, Kessa found her in the corridor. Congratulations, advisor. The lieutenant's smile was genuine. Though I'm selfishly annoyed. Now when you come to training, I have to call you advisor instead of just hitting you with practice swords. Lyra laughed. Please don't. I need someone who will still treat me normal. Deal. Speaking of which, Kessa's expression turned more serious. I wanted to say thank you for what you said about me in the council report, the recommendation for promotion. You earned it.
You've been training me, protecting me, keeping me alive since I got here. If anyone deserves recognition, it's you. Still, it means something, coming from you. Kessa paused. A month ago, I thought you were just another political pawn, someone the Alpha would use and discard. But you're different, real. And watching you go from terrified prisoner to council advisor has been genuinely inspiring. I'm still terrified most of the time, Lyra admitted. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Just don't let it control you. Kessa clapped her shoulder. Now come on. I promise to show you the advanced knife-fighting techniques, and I don't break promises to council advisors. They trained for 2 hours, and Lyra was grateful for the simplicity of it. No politics, no careful words. Just movement and sweat and Kessa's blunt corrections when her form got sloppy. Simple. Honest. Survivable. That night, she and Draven sat in their quarters reviewing reports, a domestic scene that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. The Eastern Border Lords are requesting a meeting, Draven said, scanning a document. They want assurances about trade routes and defense commitments. When? Next month. We'd have to travel there. Probably be gone 2 weeks minimum. Lyra looked up. We. You're my military advisor. Your input on border defenses would be valuable. He set down the paper. Unless you'd rather stay here, I can bring Voss instead. Lyra considered. Traveling meant leaving the fortress, facing new people, new challenges. The old her would have refused, would have stayed in the safe, known territory, but she wasn't that person anymore. I'll come, she said. Might be good to see the territories we're protecting, understand the context better. Draven smiled. You're getting comfortable with this advisor role. Don't know about comfortable, but less terrified maybe. That's progress. They worked in silence for a while longer. Then Lyra asked the question that had been nagging at her for days. What happened to my father? Draven looked up, surprised. Your father? Marcus Vane, the blacksmith from Ashwick, who tried to sell me. When you found me, you knew my whole history, which means you looked into it. So what happened to him? Draven's expression carefully neutral. Do you really want to know? I wouldn't ask if I didn't. He sighed. After you ran, he reported you as a runaway, put out notices with your description, offered a reward for your return. Lyra's hands clenched. Of course he did. I was property he hadn't finished selling. The notices went nowhere. No one found you because you'd already disappeared into the Thornwood. Draven paused. 2 years ago, he died. Fever took him during a bad winter. Your sisters inherited his shop. Dead. The man who'd branded her worthless, who'd tried to sell her like livestock, was just gone. Lyra waited for grief or relief or anger. Instead, she felt nothing, just distant acknowledgement of information. Do you want to contact your sisters? Draven asked carefully. I could arrange it, send word. No. The answer came immediately. They made their choices when I ran. Let the past stay buried. You sure? I'm sure. Lyra looked at him. My family is here now. This fortress, this kingdom, you. I don't need ghosts from Ashwick. Draven pulled her close. Our family, then. Whatever we build together. Our family, Lyra agreed. 3 months passed. The eastern border trip went well. Lyra's insights on defensive positions impressed the lords, and several asked for her counsel on their own security arrangements. Word spread that the Alpha King's Forest Girl advisor actually knew what she was talking about. The fortress settled into a new rhythm. Less fearful, more productive. Draven still had his moments of rage that would probably never fully disappear, but he learned to channel it better, to think before acting, to consider options beyond violence. The council adapted to having Lyra present. Some members genuinely valued her input. Others tolerated it for political reasons, but no one questioned her right to be there anymore. And slowly, carefully, the kingdom began to heal. Then, on a crisp autumn morning, a messenger arrived from the Thornwood. Lyra was in the training yard when Kessa found her, the lieutenant's expression odd. You have a visitor, Kessa said. Someone from your forest. Lyra's stomach dropped. What? A hunter. Says he tracked you here, has something to show you. They found the man in the main courtyard, weathered, scarred, carrying himself like someone who'd spent decades in the wilderness. He looked at Lyra with frank curiosity. You're her, he said. The ghost who lived in the deep forest. I lived there, Lyra confirmed, her voice cautious. What do you want? Just to give you this. He held out a small leather pouch. Found it in what's left of your old shelter. Figured it might be important. Lyra took the pouch with shaking hands. Inside was a small wooden carving, a bird in flight, crude but recognizable. Her mother had made it for her 10th birthday. The only thing she'd left behind when she ran. "How did you find my shelter?" she managed. "Fire burned through that section of forest last spring, exposed a lot of hidden places." The hunter shrugged. "Saw the shelter, saw that carving, heard rumors about the Alpha King's consort coming from the Thornwood. Put it together." "Thank you," Lyra whispered. The hunter nodded and left, his job done. Lyra stood there holding the carving, memories flooding back. Her mother teaching her to read, to cook, to survive. Her mother's blood on the kitchen floor after her father's rage went too far. Her mother's dying whisper, "Silence is your armor. They can't own what they can't hear." She'd carried that vow for 5 years. Let it shape her, define her, and then she'd broken it to save a kingdom. "Lyra?" Draven's voice gentle. He'd appeared without her noticing. "You all right?" She looked at the carving, then at him. "My mother made this. Before she died. Before everything. I'm sorry." "Don't be. She taught me to survive, to value my silence, to protect myself by never being seen or heard." Lyra closed her hand around the carving. "But she also told me stories about strong women who changed kingdoms, who refused to be invisible. I think she would have been proud of what I've become." "She would have," Draven agreed. "Anyone would be." Lyra tucked the carving into her pocket. A piece of the past, carried into the future. A reminder of where she'd come from and how far she'd traveled. "Come on," she said. "We have a council session in an hour. Can't be late. You're enjoying this, aren't you? The advisor role." "Enjoying is a strong word, but yes, I am." Lyra smiled. "Turns out surviving isn't just about staying alive. It's about finding something worth living for." "And have you found something worth living for?" She took his hand. "I have." 1 year after Lyra arrived at the Ironhold, Draven called a full assembly of the kingdom. Every lord, every regional leader, every person of consequence from border to border. The Great Hall was packed beyond capacity, people spilling into corridors and courtyards, everyone wanting to witness whatever announcement the Alpha King deemed important enough to summon the entire kingdom. Lyra stood beside Draven on the dais, wearing formal robes that marked her as royal consort and military advisor. She'd learned to be comfortable with the attention, though it still felt surreal sometimes. Draven raised his hand for silence. The hall quieted immediately. 1 year ago, he began, I sent my best hunters into the Thornwood to find someone who'd been surviving alone in those mountains. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. Just knew that when I heard the stories, a woman, silent, skilled, refusing to break despite 5 years of brutal isolation, I recognized something valuable. He looked at Lyra. What I found was someone who would change everything, not because she had noble blood or military training or political connections, but because she understood something I'd forgotten. That strength isn't about crushing everything weak. It's about protecting what matters, adapting, surviving, thriving. Murmurs rippled through the hall. This kingdom was built on fear and violence. My father ruled that way. I ruled that way. And it worked, for a time. But fear eventually breeds rebellion. Violence eventually consumes itself. We would have torn ourselves apart from within if not for one woman who showed us a different path. He turned to face the assembly fully. Lyra Vane came to us as a prisoner, an outcast. Someone most of you would have dismissed as worthless, but she exposed a traitor who would have destroyed us. She planned tactics that saved us from invasion. She's advised on policies that have brought stability and prosperity to regions that were bleeding and broken. She's proven repeatedly that worth isn't determined by birth or title. It's determined by what you do when everything is on the line. Draven took Lyra's hand. So today, I'm making official what most of you already know. Lyra Vane is my equal partner in ruling this kingdom. Not a consort in title only, but a true co-ruler with full authority and power. Any law I sign, she signs. Any decision I make, she counsels. Any threat we face together. The hall erupted, some in applause, some in shock, a few in obvious disapproval. Draven waited for quiet. I know some of you object, think this is improper or unprecedented or weakens the crown. But I've learned something in the past year. The strongest kingdoms aren't built by one voice demanding obedience. They're built by different voices working together, by recognizing strength wherever it appears, by choosing growth over stagnation. He looked around the hall, meeting eyes, daring challenge. So if you have a problem with this, say it now, challenge it openly, because I'm done pretending that power means ruling alone. Silence. Then Counselor Sarah stood. I support this decision. Advisor Vane has proven her value beyond question. Commander Voss rose. As do I. She's earned her place through service and sacrifice. Kessa stood. Third. One by one, members of the council and military stood in support. Not all. Lyra could see faces that remained seated, disapproving, but enough. More than enough. Finally, Lord Garrett, the man who'd challenged her appointment months ago, stood slowly. I was wrong about you, Advisor Vane, he said, his voice carrying. I doubted, I questioned, but you've proven me a fool. You have my support, and my apology. Lyra inclined her head, accepting. The assembly dissolved into discussion, celebration, argument. Draven pulled Lyra aside into a quiet alcove. How do you feel? He asked. Terrified, she admitted. Honored, overwhelmed, all of it at once. That's how I feel every day. He smiled. Welcome to ruling. We're really doing this? Co-ruling? We've been doing it for months. This just makes it official. Draven cupped her face. You walked out of the wilderness alone and survived. Built a life from nothing. Saved a kingdom that didn't deserve you. If anyone's qualified to help rule, it's you. Lyra kissed him, not caring who saw. A year ago, she would have been terrified of this much visibility. Now she was learning that being seen wasn't the same as being vulnerable. That night, she stood on the eastern rampart one last time, looking out at the mountains that had been her home for so long. The Thornwood was dark in the distance, ancient and wild and unforgiving. She'd survived it, learned from it, left it behind, but she'd never forget it. Thinking about going back? Draven joined her, as he often did on these late nights. No, just remembering. Lyra leaned against him. I was so afraid when I ran into those woods, thought silence and isolation were the only ways to stay safe, spent 5 years proving I could survive anything alone. And now? Now I know that surviving alone and actually living are different things. That the strongest version of myself isn't the one who needs no one. It's the one who chooses who to need, who to trust, who to fight beside. She looked at him. You gave me that? A reason to speak. A reason to stay. A reason to fight for something beyond just not dying. You gave me something too. A reason to be more than just a weapon. To remember there's strength in things besides violence. Draven pulled her closer. We saved each other. Fair trade. Fair trade, Lyra agreed. They stood there as the night deepened, two survivors who'd found something better than mere survival. The fortress hummed behind them. Guards changing shifts, servants preparing for tomorrow, a kingdom slowly learning to thrive instead of just endure. Lyra thought about the girl who'd run into the Thornwood 5 years ago, broken and silent and certain she'd die alone. Thought about the promises she'd made to her dying mother, about the armor of silence that had protected her for so long. She'd broken that armor, shattered it completely, and instead of dying vulnerable, she'd become something stronger. Not because she'd learned to fight better or scheme smarter or rule harder, but because she'd learned that true strength wasn't about protecting yourself from everyone. It was about finding the right people to protect, and letting them protect you back. What are you thinking? Draven asked. Lyra smiled. That I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And where's that? Home. The word felt right, perfect, complete. She'd run from one home and survived 5 years without another. Now, finally, she'd found one worth keeping, worth defending, worth building into something that would outlast them both. The wind picked up, carrying scents of pine and stone and the distant promise of winter. Lyra breathed it in, let it fill her lungs, and felt something she hadn't felt since her mother died. Peace, not the absence of struggle. There would always be struggle. Not the end of fear. Fear kept you sharp, kept you alive. But the deep, bone-level certainty that whatever came next, she could face it. Not alone, not invisible, not silent, but standing beside someone who'd seen her at her worst and chosen her anyway, leading a kingdom that had learned to value wisdom over violence. speaking with a voice that had been silent for 5 years but now carried weight and authority and truth. Lyra Vane had survived the Thornwood, had survived the Ironhold, had survived betrayal in battle and the deadly politics of a fractured court. And now, finally, she was done just surviving. Now came the part where she lived, where she ruled, where she proved every single day that the worthless mute from Ashwick had become something none of them, not her father, not Thorn, not the Southern Kingdoms, not even herself, had ever imagined possible. A queen in everything but name, a voice that commanded armies, a force that had reshaped a kingdom, and she'd done it all by choosing again and again to stay when running would have been easier, to speak when silence would have been safer, to trust when isolation would have been simpler. She'd done it by being exactly who she was, flawed, frightened, fierce, and refusing to apologize for it. Draven's hand found hers in the darkness. "Ready to go inside?" he asked. Lyra took one last look at the mountains, at the forest that had saved her, at the wilderness that had taught her everything she needed to know about survival. Then she turned toward the fortress, toward the future, toward everything they'd build together. "Ready?" she said, and she was.